completely wrong facts that people still believe. The Great Lie of China. If you actually ended up becoming one of the fortunate few people who achieved their childhood goal of becoming an astronaut, you would at some point have the opportunity to go to space. And during that time in space, if you happened to look down at the Earth, you would at some point find the Great Wall of China, right? We all know that the Great Wall of China is visible to the naked eye in space because of its sheer massive size. But what if I told you that wasn't the case at all? And the origins of this folktale actually date back to comic books. Let me explain. There is no doubt that the Great Wall of China is one of the coolest man-made structures on this entire planet. The history, the architecture, the grandeur, it's all insane. And because of that, the Great Wall was a perfect candidate for the perfect lie. And this lie actually dates back as far as 1932. During this time, Ripley's Believe It or Not, yeah, the people that made the best book at the book fairs, were doing short stories and comic strips. And potentially one of their most iconic comic strips stated that the Great Wall of China was the mightiest work of man, and that it was the only man-made structure that was visible not from space, but from the moon. The comic goes on to state other facts and information about the Great Wall of China, but that first line about the Great Wall being seen from space was not only an unsubstantiated claim, but was also enough to get people hooked, line and sinker. And from that point on, this wild claim made before anybody even went to space was just taken as fact. And well, the myth still persists to this day. Now, I would say it's more or less common sense that you can't see any one specific man-made structure on Earth from the moon, but I can see where it gets a bit dicey when you swap the moon for space. But with the construction of the International Space Station, it has been confirmed by numerous astronauts that the Great Wall of China is not visible to the naked eye from space. Astronauts have claimed that they have seen the Great Wall of China, but it has required magnification. But on top of requiring magnification, they also need to be extremely focused on where they're looking because the Great Wall of China blends into the landscape so well. The brown and gray bricks on the wall don't necessarily contrast super well from the brown trees and dirt. And for that reason, unless you know exactly where to look and you have a bit of magnification, you're not going to see the Great Wall of China from space. And you'd have a much better bet looking from a commercial airplane, assuming you knew where to look and it was clear. Now, to add a bit of insult to injury, astronauts have also claimed that there are other man-made structures that are way easier to spot from space, with those structures being way less important than the Great Wall of China, specifically airstrips and large stretches of road. And the reason for that is simply because of contrast. The dark black tarmac used to make roads and airstrips is much more visible. And on top of that, these simple structures are typically very straight. And as some of you may know, straight lines do not exist in nature. So for those two reasons, these simple structures stand out a lot more than the Great Wall of China. So yeah, the Great Wall of China is cool, but it's not visible from space cool. Which, please. I would say it's safe to assume that most people watching this video are familiar with the hysteria-induced Salem witch trials of 1692. And while the witch trials happened and were crazy, there are a ton of myths and misconceptions surrounding the Salem witch trials. So for that reason, I'm gonna kind of speedrun a bunch of Salem witch trial myths. You know, because we are getting into the spooky season. Okay, for starters, it wasn't just women that were being accused of witchcraft. During this time, everybody was hysterical, and nobody was safe from a demonic or witchcraft allegation. And while it is a fact that mostly women were accused and prosecuted, a quarter of the people that were killed during the Salem witch trials were actually men. This may or may not be surprising, but what probably is surprising is the fact that it wasn't only humans that were killed during the Salem witch trials. There was at least 2 dogs confirmed to be killed because they were accused and found guilty of witchcraft. And in these dogs' cases specifically, they were found guilty of being under the influence of witchcraft, which means that it wasn't even their fault, but they still died because of it, and that is sad. And speaking of deaths, I think the most common misconception about the Salem witch trials was that witches were burned at the stake. And while it's undeniable that at least 20 people were killed during the Salem witch trials, none of them were burned. That's right, 19 of them were hung, and 1 of them was crushed to death by rocks. Now, if you're saying to yourself, I know for a fact witches were burned at the stake, you're right, but it did not happen in Salem. All of the burnings that happened took place in Europe. And while the Salem witch trials only lasted roughly a year, there was multi-year-long hysteria and witch hunts that took place over in Europe that claimed the lives of thousands. And over there, they were burning witches left, right, and center. And I find that a bit interesting because Salem is now forever bound to the concept of witch hunts and witch trials. Although, compared to the witch trials that took place in Europe, what happened in Salem was really a drop in the bucket. Not to say that it was okay, but I mean, comparably, 20 deaths versus 1,000, you'd think they'd associate the practice with the Europeans. Or at least the Europoopans. Oh my god, that was so dumb. Razor sharp lies. When I was a young, naive little bro, I was once told that if you shaved your face, the facial hair would grow back thicker, fuller, and darker. And hearing this as like a 13, 14-year-old bro, all I wanted to do was shave because I really wanted to have some cool facial hair and seem older than I was, like every other kid does. I remember shaving and bleeding a lot, but never making any facial hair progress. And I actually ended up giving up on the practice before I ever learned the truth. And if you had a similar situation, well, welcome to the club, because a lot of people have not only heard this myth, but actively fall for it every single day. The origins of this myth, interestingly, are unknown, although clinical studies disproving this myth date back all the way into the 1920s, which just goes to show how prolific this myth is, because we have literally had clinical studies for almost 100 years proving that shaving does not affect your hair thickness, but people still believe it. And while it actually has no physical effect, appearances are something we can discuss. And here's what I mean by that. When you shave, the razor cuts the hair on the surface of the skin, but it has no effect on the follicle deep below the skin. The hair that was on your face went from a long pointed tip to a short nub. And this little nub of hair can feel coarser as it begins to grow out. And if you couple this short-lived bluntness of the freshly shaved hair with the fact that the new hair that is growing hasn't yet been exposed to any chemicals or sunlight to lighten it, then you may feel like this new freshly shaved hair is coming back thicker and darker. But in reality, it's more or less of an optical illusion that typically only lasts a few days. The ladies are gonna know what I'm talking about. You know, if you shave your legs and then a few days later your legs feel prickly, that's because of the blunted, coarse hair. You're not getting hairier or growing new hair, it's just the hair that was there needs some time to grow that fine tip again. And if there really was any truth to this myth, don't you think shaving your head would become the #1 remedy for baldness? I mean, to be fair, it kind of is the #1 remedy or solution, but not because it grows your hair back. It just prevents you from looking like Murr from Impractical Jokers. But yeah, while there are genuine methods of regrowing hair and making your hair thicker, shaving is not one of them. And I'm glad it's not, because that would literally make the entire act counterproductive. The baby bird belief. Have you ever been out on a walk when you see a vulnerable, injured baby bird on the sidewalk all by himself? This is a deeply heartbreaking sight, and all you want to do is help out this little baby bird. But right as you kneel down to pick up this bird and put them anywhere else, your friend tells you, hey, you can't touch this baby bird. If you touch this baby bird, its mom will pick up on your scent and abandon this bird completely. If you touch it, it's gonna die. The best thing you can do is leave it. So then you and your friend continue to walk on the sidewalk, only for that bird to get run over by a guy on a one wheel. Tragic. This is a myth that I definitely believed, actually up until recently, honestly, because I never thought about it too much, but I remember hearing this a lot when I was younger. Thinking about it now, it seems like a clever way for parents to make their kids not touch wild animals, but that's about as deep as it goes, because this claim is more or less of a folklore or a myth. When speaking about birds specifically, first of all, birds don't even have a very strong sense of smell to begin with. So scientists claim that it's highly unlikely that a bird would even be able to tell the difference whether or not their child has been touched by a human or not. And regardless of their lack of smell, birds are dedicated parents and go to pretty extreme lengths to ensure the survival of their children, even if that means killing one of their children, which sounds counterproductive, but I mean, if you've got 4 kids, one of them sucks, and you want at least 3 of them to live, you gotta get rid of the bad one, at least in bird logic. Now, with every myth, there's typically a kernel of truth. The kernel of truth is this. There is specific scenarios where birds will abandon their young, but it's not nearly as simple as, oh, if you touch the baby bird, it's done. What typically causes a bird to abandon its nest is if the bird's nest is simply too hostile to continue to live in. If the nest is consistently visited or even threatened by predators on a regular basis, and the bird's babies are still in the egg stage, then the parents may make the tough decision of abandoning the nest to begin a new one in a safer location. Although, if the chicks have been hatched, it's going to take a lot to scare away a parent bird from its nest. Although every bird is different, and there's definitely a fluctuation on commitment when it comes to bird parents. The general consensus is that birds that live longer are typically more picky and sensitive with their young, and potentially more likely to abandon their children. However, birds that live relatively shorter lives typically tend to be more committed to their children. And what's even more interesting is the fact that this doesn't only apply to birds. There are not many animals that will simply abandon their child because it has been encountered by a human, with one of the notable exceptions being rabbits. Rabbits in general live very high stress lives and can even die from stress if you try to pick one up. But besides rabbits, most animals are not going to ditch their kids simply because you touch them. Now, with all of this being said, I feel like it's important to note that you shouldn't be touching baby animals in most cases. You don't know what diseases they have, and they don't know what diseases you have. In most cases, baby animals are not far from their mothers, and even if you don't see them, the parents are typically watching or not too far away. And if you find yourself in a situation where there is a vulnerable baby animal that is in desperate need of your help, don't neglect it out of fear of it being abandoned. However, if there's a baby animal that you see that's safe, although alone, it's best to leave it alone and assume that the parent is nearby, which is often the case. Although, use your discretion and feel free to call your local animal shelter to get more professional advice. Mouthful myth. Have you ever been watching TV and either seen somebody have a seizure or maybe get knocked out in a fight, only for people to run to the rescue and put them on their side and maybe even put something in their mouth to ensure that they do not swallow their tongue? I know I have, and I can't pinpoint exactly where, honestly, but I know for a fact that I've heard that it's not only possible, but a genuine risk that if you become unconscious, whether through sleeping, seizure, or trauma, that there's a chance that you could swallow your tongue and suffocate. If you've heard or potentially even believed this myth, it honestly kind of makes sense. I mean, your tongue is long, and if you're not actively controlling it, it could potentially go the wrong way. But the truth of the matter is that it is physically impossible to swallow your tongue, meaning that this is not a genuine risk. Unless your tongue becomes detached from your body somehow, it is physically impossible to swallow your own tongue, which is a good thing. Now, what's unfortunate is the actual truth of the matter and things that people try to do to prevent tongue swallowing. One of the worst things that somebody can do to prevent somebody from swallowing their tongue is by putting something in the person's mouth. If someone specifically having a seizure has an object inserted into their mouth, it can essentially just become a weapon and causing potentially broken teeth and now a new foreign object being in the mouth of somebody who's unconscious and seizing, which is a genuine danger because this object could be swallowed, which is definitely not good. What actually happens if you become incapacitated? Well, unless you're seizing, all of your muscles are going to relax. This includes your tongue. And when your tongue is in a relaxed state, it is possible for your tongue to partially or even completely obscure your breathing. Obviously, this isn't swallowing your tongue, but it is still dangerous. This phenomenon is extremely common, and it is known in most cases as snoring. Sleep apnea specifically is a result of a partial blockage in your airway during your sleep. But in the case of somebody who's currently seizing, their muscles aren't relaxed whatsoever. One of the bigger risks isn't their tongue falling to the back of their throat, it's actually the individual biting their tongue, and in some cases off. If you thought biting your tongue accidentally when you ate felt bad, imagine unconsciously putting all of the force of your jaw onto your tongue for minutes on end. That is a scary thought. But in either of these situations, whether your body is relaxed or tense, it is impossible to swallow your own tongue, although it doesn't mean that you shouldn't consider it when helping somebody who is unconscious. The best way to really help anybody who's unconscious is to put them into the recovery position, which can prevent tongue issues and allow somebody to vomit without choking on it as well. Here's a quick graphic on how to do the recovery position in case you wanted to know. Honestly, doesn't hurt to know because it literally could save somebody's life. But this video isn't about saving lives, it's about disproving myths. So let's keep going. Dead toenail tails. You and the neighbor kid are hanging out, and during this hangout, you guys get bored. And the neighbor kid says, "Hey, let me show you something. It's pretty cool." You follow him outside and you guys go on a short walk when you end up in a dark building in a basement. He turns on the light in this basement and all you see is doors on a wall. The neighbor kid opens one of these doors and pulls out a tray. And on this tray, disturbingly, is a dead body. You don't even believe what you're seeing at first and assume you're in a haunted house. When the neighbor kid confirms your worst nightmare, he says, "Look at this dead person." You reluctantly take a peek and say, "Yeah, what about it?" When he tells you their hair and nails are still growing. "Look, I was here yesterday, and their hair and nails weren't nearly this long." At that point, morbid curiosity takes over, and you take a look at their fingernails, which do look a bit long. But then you ask the neighbor kid, "Wait, you were here yesterday?" And then you both decide to stop disturbing the dead and leave. That story, admittedly, was morbid, but it helps me paint the picture of this next misconception. Seemingly forever now, people have believed that after you die, you still continue to have hair and nail growth for some time after death. And whether or not this is something you've ever heard or believed, the reality is this: no human grows hair or grows their nails after death. Although, similar to the shaving thing, there is a bit of an optical illusion at play, and it is a morbid one. At this point, numerous dermatologists have debunked this myth simply by claiming is what you're seeing when you see potential nail growth or hair growth after someone dies isn't the actual growth of the hair or nails at all. What it is a dehydration of the body causing a retraction of the skin, appearing the hair and nails to seem larger or longer. And while that may give you some clarity, it still doesn't answer why you're hanging out with a dead body. But seriously, to grow hair and nails, your body needs to be 1, alive, and 2, able to regulate a complex hormonal system that allows the creation of hair and nails to even happen. And this is even a struggle for some people that are alive, let alone dead people. But leaving Will Smith's husband out of it, to further prove this point, we're going to now show you graphic images of dead people. 3, 2, I am just kidding, and I know some of you were kind of looking forward to it, and you need to seek help. Food fairy tales. Admittedly, transitioning from dead people to food isn't ideal, but here we are. And we've got a stinker. I would argue that most people have at least heard, or potentially even still believe, that eating turkey specifically makes you sleepy. And they might even have evidence to back it up, which I'll quickly explain. People that believe that turkey makes you feel sleepy believe this because there is a chemical known as tryptophan within turkey. Interestingly, there is scientific evidence that shows that tryptophan is involved in sleep and mood control and can even cause drowsiness. And L-tryptophan has even been sold and marketed as a sleep aid. So far, it seems like turkey making you sleepy is proven true, right? But here's where things get interesting. Because while all of this is true, turkey meat is not the only meat that contains tryptophan. For example, chicken and minced beef also contain nearly the exact same amount of tryptophan, roughly 350 milligrams per 150 grams of meat. But besides this, pork and cheese actually have more tryptophan than turkey, which kind of muddies up the equation a bit, because nobody talks about eating pork or cheese and then going to bed, or chicken or beef for that matter. It's always turkey. But to make things even more muddy, L-tryptophan supplements are typically recommended on an empty stomach to help maximize absorption. And if you're eating turkey with, a Thanksgiving meal, with stuffing, with bread, with other things, your absorption of that tryptophan is going to be lower than if you were just eating turkey by itself, further reducing its effectiveness. I don't want to get all technical on you, but here's the truth. A lot of people believe that eating turkey specifically makes you sleepy because it's full of tryptophan. And while on the surface that seems like it's plausible, in reality, the reason why people feel so tired after eating a huge turkey meal, typically on Christmas or Thanksgiving, is because exactly that. They are eating a huge meal, and it's the meal itself that is causing the drowsiness. Any large, solid meal can induce sleepiness because of the increased blood flow and oxygen to the digestive system. And why that is because if there is extra blood and oxygen in your digestive tract, you know where it's not? In your brain, which means that you're literally going to feel more lethargic, and in most cases, sleepy. So yeah, turkey won't make you any more sleepier than chicken or beef would. And if you're sitting at Thanksgiving dinner wondering why your dad is asleep at the table, it's not because he had too much turkey. It's because he had 14 beers in the garage before dinner. The lazy brain legend. Quickly, if you guys are enjoying this video and would like to see me make another video on completely wrong facts, feel free to leave a like or leave a comment saying part 2. That way I know that you guys really want a follow-up to this video. Also, if you're part of the 70-something% of people that aren't subscribed, feel free to consider it. We make pretty good videos and we post every Friday. Now, let's talk about your lazy brain. We all know that in 2025, there is an endless supply of self-help gurus telling you that you need to be better and selling you the solution to be better. But the reality is, this business practice is nowhere near new, and people were even doing this as early as 1907. What were people saying in 1907? Well, they were saying that you are only using roughly 10% of your brain. And this slogan kind of got a lot of traction and allowed a lot of people to make a lot of money selling ways to tap into untapped potential within your brain. And from these claims dating back as early as 1907, people to this day still quote and believe that you only use roughly 10% of your brain. But is it really true? Well, according to evidence from studies of brain damage, brain imaging, localization of function within the brain, and even metabolic studies of the brain, people use much more than just 10% of their brains. Now, specifically focusing on the brain imaging studies, out of the countless brain imaging studies that have taken place, none of them have ever shown an area of the brain to be fully silent or inactive. What they did find was that many functions of the brain are highly localized, with different tasks being allocated to different parts of the brain, which is, I think at this point, relatively common knowledge, at least the left and right hemisphere part, but it obviously goes much deeper than that. But that alone kind of just disproves the entire myth that we only use 10% of our brain. It would make no sense for our most vital organ that is literally consuming most of our calories, at least compared to other organs, to be so dormant. It makes almost no sense, and I would probably argue that even when you are sleeping, or potentially even unconscious, you are using more than 10% of your brain because of all of the unconscious acts that your body is consistently doing. I would even argue that your dad passed out on the Thanksgiving table has more than 10% brain activity, even if he only has 10% of a normal brain. Regardless, outside of just imaging studies, neuroscientists have even probed individual, localized micro parts of the brain to test the response of single neurons. And even those tests revealed that there was no gaps or inactive areas. Everywhere that they probed in the brain was able to essentially respond to the stimuli, proving that all of the brain was active. And whether or not all of the brain is doing equal quality or efficient work is a different conversation. But the claim of 90% of the brain being unused is completely untrue, at least from a biological standpoint. There may be a separate argument specifically about this conscious versus subconscious mind, but even still, your subconscious mind is active, it's not dormant, it's just not fully within your control. So yeah, good news, you use more than 10% of your brain. The bad news is even 100% of zero IQ is still zero IQ. The biggest scams in human history, the Charles Ponzi scheme. The word Ponzi probably sounded familiar to you and instantly made you think of fraud or scams or schemes. And you're exactly right. Ponzi schemes are an extremely well-known and unfortunately well-used type of scam. But what I'm discussing is the original Ponzi scheme. named after Charles Ponzi, a man who ran one of the largest financial scams of his time and was so influential with his scams that they literally named the method of fraud after him. Charles Ponzi didn't necessarily invent the Ponzi scheme technique, but he did have one of the most impactful uses of it originally, making him the grandfather of financial fraud, scams, and the Ponzi scheme. Charles was born on March 3rd, 1882, and he had likely one of the longest names I've ever seen. His full name was Carlo Pietro Giovanni Guglielmo Tebaldo Ponzi. That's right, that's 6 names. Like, is it 1 first name, 4 middle names, and 1 last name? 2 first names, 2 middle names, 2 last names? 6 first names? I don't know. It may not come as a surprise that Mr. Charles' 6th name Ponzi was born in northern Italy, in case the names didn't already give that away. According to interviews and his own biography, Ponzi found a love for earning and spending money at a young age. And he even said, quote, "Spending money seemed the most attractive thing on earth." Now, that's easy to say when you're spending time in universities with your rich friends and they're covering your tab. But once you need to start paying your own bills, that's when things get tough. And that's exactly what happened to Charles Ponzi, as he ended up leaving university with no money in his pocket and no diploma to show for his time at the school. And because of this, Ponzi decided that his best course of action was to follow in the footsteps of some of his family members and go to America to seek new opportunities. Now, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that was relatively common, and a lot of Italians were emigrating to the United States from Italy, although not many of them ended up doing what Ponzi did. After arriving in America, Ponzi worked odd jobs, trying to get some sort of cash flow in this new life he had begun. Although he couldn't hold the job down for long because he was often caught stealing. Once he likely burned too many bridges in the States, he then decided to move to Canada. Once in Canada, he found his first real career as a bank teller at a bank that was specifically made for Italian immigrants coming to Canada. He was obviously a shoo-in, and because of this, combined with his people skills, he was able to quickly climb the ladder of the company. And this really marks the turning point, where his petty theft turns into widespread financial fraud. Now, it wasn't with this bank where he committed the fraud that we're going to end up discussing, although it's definitely where the seed was planted, because the bank that he was working for actually ended up going under, because the founder of this bank, Luigi Zarassi, was actually running a Ponzi scheme out of this bank, offering high interest rates to customers and paying out those interest payments from new deposits. And once this bank collapsed, Ponzi's career also collapsed, leaving him once again with no money and no direction. And during this time, he actually got caught with a fake check and went to prison for 3 years, which he served, and then after his time was up, he went back to the United States. And once back in the States, he obviously started a new life, right? He was a clean man. He went to jail. He learned his lesson. No. His first job, once back in the States, was actually smuggling Italian immigrants into the United States, which he got caught for and served an additional 2 years. And after this second stint in jail and 2 more failed businesses, Ponzi decided that it was time to get rich, for real. And this is where his big scheme and all of his criminal career comes together. And he decides to run his first Ponzi scheme. Now, we're going to be talking about Ponzi schemes a lot, so if you're not familiar with what a Ponzi scheme is, in short, it's the old adage of robbing Peter to pay Paul. What you essentially do is take money from Group A. Let's say Group A gives you money because you tell them you're going to double their money. And then you get Group B and C to give you money under the same deal that you're going to help them double their money. You take Group B and C's money and give it to Group A. You officially now doubled their money. But now Group B and C want their money doubled, right? So you need Group D and E, new investors, to pay Group C and B. And essentially, it's a never-ending cycle where you need new people to pay off old debts, while at the same time keeping the entire lie concealed that you actually don't have the money that you say you have, and that there is no investment or accumulation of wealth going on. You're simply perpetually in debt and allowing new investors to pay the debt to old investors, and nobody's really making money. And as soon as you stop getting new investors, everything falls apart. That's the long and short of a Ponzi scheme. But what makes a Ponzi scheme so insane is the scale that some people take it, which is what we're going to discuss. So after jail and failed business after failed business after failed job, how exactly did Charles Ponzi plan to get rich? What was the original Ponzi scheme? It actually involved postage coupons. Obviously, in the early 1900s, like literally 1906, there was no iMessage, there was no Instagram, there's no text, there's nothing. And letters were huge. And during this time, there was something known as an international reply coupon. And what it was basically a courtesy. Let's say that you're in the United States and you're writing a letter to your friend in the United Kingdom. You might pay 25 cents to send your letter to your friend. But as a courtesy, you might not want to make them spend their own money to reply to you because they didn't ask for you to reach out to them, right? So this international reply coupon is something that you would buy, put in the letter that you're sending to your friend so that when your friend opened the letter, they had a coupon to send you a letter back free of charge to them because you already paid for it. Makes sense and seems simple enough. But to Ponzi, this wasn't simply a courtesy, this was an arbitrage opportunity. You see, as a scammer, Ponzi was always looking for people to pick up his business ideas. And because of that, he was sending letters constantly to people that he was pitching business ideas to. And one day he got a letter back from a company in Spain. And this company included an international reply coupon in the letter. And one thing that Ponzi noticed was that the price on this international reply coupon from Spain was different than the price of the ones he could buy in the States. Now, this is interesting because on paper, all of the coupons are supposed to have the same cash price. But because of World War I, inflation affected different areas differently, meaning that although the prices may have remained the same, the values of the currencies have not, which meant that there was an opportunity for Ponzi to make some money. For simple math, let's say that you in the United States could buy one of these reply coupons for 5 cents USD, and your friend in the United Kingdom could buy a stamp for 5 pence. Assuming at one point these currencies had the exact same value, both you and your friend are paying the same amount for these coupons. However, let's say inflation affected the UK more than it did the US during World War I, and now the Great British Pound is worth 10% less compared to the US dollar. There's an opportunity, because while the prices of each of these items is still the same, the relative value of the money that your friend in the UK is buying them for is less. Meaning that if you converted 500 US dollars for 550 Great British Pounds, you could get 11,000 international reply coupons. And if you sold those 11,000 international reply coupons in the United States, you would get 550 US dollars. So through this clever strategy, you were able to turn 500 US dollars into 550 US dollars. And that's the basis of this scam. And while that process is known as arbitrage and isn't a scam, that's just an opportunity that exists between markets, what Ponzi ended up doing definitely was a scam. Ponzi started claiming that he could give people big returns because of this arbitrage opportunity. And he told potential investors that he had people all across Europe that were buying up these coupons in bulk, shipping them to the States where he was selling them for a profit. And that if you as an investor were looking to make some money, simply give him your money, he will buy these coupons and give you a return. And the return that he was claiming was massive. He claimed a 50% return in 45 days or an 100% return in 90 days. And if you're familiar with investing at all, those are insane returns. Now here's the thing. Experienced investors at the time weren't falling for Ponzi's scheme. They knew his pitch seemed too good to be true. And when they pushed him about how this money was being made, Ponzi refused to give information under the guise that it would help the competition. This obviously wasn't satisfactory to high-level investors, and for that reason they were interested. However, Ponzi was definitely able to fool the common folk, people who had aspirations of getting rich quick and didn't really know any better. And that ended up becoming the basis of the company that he had just started, the Securities Exchange Company, a company that would go on to become one of the largest scams of all time. Because of the massive returns that Ponzi was claiming and initially paying out, the word spread like wildfire. And it wasn't long until he had thousands and thousands of customers investing millions of dollars directly with him. And it's claimed that at the height of his career, he was pulling in over $250,000 per day, which is over $3 million a day in today's money. But in case this wasn't already obvious, nobody was buying these international reply coupons at all. Although that was technically a possible arbitrage opportunity, the operational logistics of operating that sort of scheme would have made no sense for investors. As after you paid people to buy these coupons, ship them overseas, and sell them domestically, that small 10% margin would have been eaten up. And if inflation ended up changing in any of these markets that they were operating in, the entire thing could have fallen apart anyways. That being said, Ponzi was telling investors that their money was going to fund this arbitrage opportunity, when in reality, it was going into his bank account, funding his lavish lifestyle, and paying out old investors. But all of the fun and games did not last long, because in the summer of 1920, everything came crashing down for Charles Ponzi. Essentially, what happened was Charles was not only getting popularity through word of mouth, but he was now getting media coverage. And one of the biggest newspapers in Boston, which he was living in at the time, posted a story about him and his rags to riches story and how he was able to provide such unheard of returns to his investors. It was great publicity and earned him additional millions. However, this newfound attention gathered newfound scrutiny, and it wasn't long until people started to investigate him. And shortly after this great PR came hit pieces, which weren't even hit pieces. They were just basically saying, hey, this guy has no money. Go get your money. And at that point, investors were like, yeah, I would like to get my money. And once it was proven that Charles Ponzi was not only insolvent, but also a criminal with a record in Canada and the States, investors were furious, and almost like a bank run, everybody wanted their money money at once, which is obviously impossible with a Ponzi scheme, and the house of cards officially collapsed. It was later confirmed that Ponzi never sold any international reply coupons within the United States, and at the time of his arrest was $7 million in debt. Keep in mind, this is 1920 money. Charles Ponzi ended up being convicted of mail fraud, and the collapse of his Ponzi scheme actually resulted in the subsequent collapse of 6 other banks. And of course, the financial hardship and ruin of the tens of thousands of investors that trusted Charles Ponzi with their money. Some fortunate investors did receive 30 cents on the dollar back, and some received nothing back at all. In total, investors at the time lost around $20 million, which calculated for today's money is over $300 million. Keep in mind, this is only over the course of literally a year. The scheme only started to gain traction in 1919, and the entire house of cards collapsed in 2020. And this was also 100 years ago, when the population was much smaller and financial markets were not nearly as developed as they were today. Regardless, Charles Ponzi is a pioneer of fraud and scams, which is definitely nothing to be proud of. And while this definitely isn't the biggest financial scam to ever happen, or even the most famous example of a Ponzi scheme happening, this was the first official Ponzi scheme. And Charles Ponzi is a grandfather of fraud. And for that reason, I knew his story deserved the first spot on this list. I could make an entire video about the craziest Ponzi schemes ever, but I wanted to keep this video about scams diverse. And for that reason, I decided why not pick the original. Let's move on. The Elizabeth Holmes scandal. What happens when you mix amazing PR with one of the most innovative and impactful medical devices to ever be invented? Well, you would get the youngest female self-made billionaire. And her name is Elizabeth Holmes. Elizabeth Holmes went to Stanford University, where she dropped out at the age of 19. And she dropped out because she had bigger plans. She had plans of revolutionizing the entire medical industry. And in 2003, she founded the company in which she was going to do that with. The original name of the company was Real-Time Cures, but it was shortly after renamed to Theranos, a company that is now known as one of the largest scams in venture capital and human history. In 2004, only a year after its founding, Holmes was able to raise a total of $6 million in funding for her healthcare project. And in 6 short years, by the end of 2010, her company Theranos had over $92 million in venture capital investments, which basically just means rich business people invested in her company to help it grow so they could make a return on their investment. The reason why Elizabeth was able to gather almost $100 million in investor funds in only 7 years after founding the company isn't because she was the smoothest talker of all time, or because she had the craziest arbitrage opportunity. She had a very compelling idea in a market that was extremely profitable. As I mentioned, Theranos is a healthcare company, and the specific goal of Theranos was to develop a machine that could provide the most accurate and comprehensive analysis of your current health through only a minuscule few drops of blood. And the reason she claimed to have had this idea is because she was very scared of needles and realized that blood testing required a lot of blood and a lot of needles. Although, if you could develop a technology that only required a finger prick to gather important health information, more people would be willing to get this sort of testing. Testing could be done more easily and accessibly, and ultimately lives could be improved and even saved. Just think about it. If you could walk into a Walgreens, prick your finger, put a drop of blood onto a machine, and know basically everything about your body, diseases you might be at risk for, diseases you might have, and deficiencies you may have, why wouldn't you do that? And this, obviously simplified, is the story that Elizabeth Holmes was selling, specifically in the form of the Edison, the machine that Theranos was developing to do all of this magic work, where it could take a few drops of blood and analyze it and even diagnose the patient. Now, obviously, this is a video about scams, not medical breakthroughs, so what gives? Holmes had really big ideas, but unfortunately, she lacked big execution and integrity. See, in Silicon Valley, the idea of this up-and-coming medical company with the amazing results was gaining popularity, and obviously that showed with the investments being made. But Holmes' scheme was only further given credibility by the people she was surrounding herself by, specifically well-known, successful, and credible investors and also board members, as well as former and current members of the United States government. And this was intentional on her part. She wanted to make herself and her company seem legit as possible, which is interesting because for a while, Theranos was in quote-unquote stealth mode, which essentially meant that it was not publicly facing at all. There was no website, no social media, simply a behind-the-scenes product that investors were getting in early before it went to market. Theranos at its peak was valued at over $9 $9 billion, and even had a partnership with Walgreens, one of the largest pharmacy chains in the entire United States. And this is actually where part of the scam gets dark, because this partnership involved Walgreens using Theranos' Edison device to diagnose patients. But here's the deal. And this is kind of the encompassing issue with this entire situation. Theranos never had a working product. This Edison machine never worked as described. They claimed with a drop of blood, you could have over 200 tests performed, but that was simply never the case. And not only could it not do that, what it did do was typically inaccurate. And obviously, when you're having inaccuracies medically at scale, you are going to have dire consequences. People getting misdiagnosed. And as a consequence, people could die. Now, for the medical victims, there is a bit of a silver lining, because Theranos knew that their machine was inaccurate and didn't work fully, if at all. And for that reason, they were sneakily doing third-party lab testing, essentially outsourcing their blood work to other companies that do legitimate blood work, which at least doesn't put patients at risk, but is fraud when you are telling investors that you are using a proprietary machine and you are still lying to medical patients. If you are telling them that, oh, yeah, you just need a prick of blood, and then you show up at the office and they're like, oh, actually, we need to draw blood for you, but not everybody, only we need to draw blood from you, but everybody else gets a finger prick. Just in this situation, you need to get blood drawn. It is still deception in a medical setting, which is never okay. And for all the investors that thought that they were getting in early to this revolutionary medical device, they were actually funding nothing of the sort. And that's where things begin to fall. Because in 2015, a whistleblower from within the Theranos company brought his concerns to a Wall Street Journal journalist. And together, they exposed the lies about the technology and how Theranos was using traditional lab equipment and lying about basically any real innovation. And this is when the floodgates opened, because the following year, in 2016, Walgreens terminated their partnership with Theranos and closed all of their in-store testing centers. And because of this, major investors began to withdraw from the company and even demanded their money back. And only a few years later, in 2018, criminal charges were placed after a lengthy court proceeding where Elizabeth Holmes claimed her innocence confidently and proudly. She was eventually convicted of 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, which is honestly a bit light in my opinion. Regardless, she was sentenced to over 11 years in prison, where she currently resides to this day. So yeah, this is really a heartbreaking story for many reasons. Elizabeth Holmes seemed like such a promising, bright, young entrepreneur, and on the surface seemed to pave a path for female entrepreneurs and the entire medical industry. However, in reality, she was just a female Steve Jobs wannabe with the craziest eyes you've ever seen and a complete disregard for investor funds, any sort of transparency, or for accurate results for the patients that they were working with. Investors were credited back whatever funds were currently available, and hundreds of people lost their job, as at their height, Theranos had over 800 employees. This story is a really great example of why you should never believe everything you hear. And just because somebody says a lot of fancy words and claims to do things that you don't understand definitely doesn't mean that they actually understand or can do what they're saying. But we still have one more scam to discuss in this video. If you've enjoyed this video so far about the craziest scams in human history and would like to see a part 2 with more crazy scams and Ponzi schemes, please either leave a like to show support on this video or literally comment below part 2. If the response is overwhelming, I will definitely make a part 2, because unfortunately there is more than enough insane scams to cover, and I simply can't put them all in one video. But now let's discuss the final entry on this video, the Enron scandal. So far, we've discussed Ponzi schemes, medical fraud, and for this final story, we're discussing accounting scandals. Enron was an American energy, commodities, and service-based company based in Houston, Texas, and it was founded by Kenneth Lay. And if an energy, commodities, and service company sounds confusing, it is, and that kind of played into their favor. For simplicity, I'll refer to Enron as an energy company, but they did a lot under their corporate umbrella. Enron was born out of a merger between the Houston Natural Gas Company and Internorth, 2 relatively small energy companies that existed separately before they obviously merged. And from that merger in 1985 all the way up into the year 2000, Enron grew seemingly exponentially, and not only grew as an appetizing investment opportunity, but also appeared to be a great employment opportunity as well. And at their peak in 2001, Enron had over 20,000 employees, which is a lot of people whose livelihood depends on the success of your company. Your employees' medication, your employees' children's education, your employees' retirement fund, and their mortgage all depend on the income that they make from working for you. And the reason why I'm emphasizing this is for a reason we'll get into. From the merger until the year 2000, Enron seemed publicly to be able to do no wrong. And by the year 2000, almost everybody with a brain was investing in Enron because of how profitable and successful the company was. They were innovative when it came to commodities trading, and they appeared to be the top of their field. And Fortune magazine even named Enron America's most innovative company for 6 consecutive years in a row. So of course, there was nothing going on behind the scenes, right? You know what video you're watching. That obviously wasn't the case. Just look at this. From 1998 to 2000, this is what the stock price looked like. This is a very healthy, good-looking stock, right? Now, this is what the stock chart looks like from 2000 until the end of 2001. Yeah. From over $80 to under 80 cents in a year. Enron's house of cards also collapsed, but it wasn't because they were running a Ponzi scheme or they had a fraudulent product. It's because they were absolutely fraudulently manipulating their accounting to make their numbers seem way better than they actually were. They publicly disclosed false information to try to deceive investors and company stakeholders. And for a while, it worked until it didn't. Let me give an example of one of the ways they manipulated their accounting to make their revenues look better than they were. In the year 2000, right before their bankruptcy and collapse, Enron actually signed a 20-year contract with Blockbuster. The goal was to develop an experimental online streaming service of sorts for videos, which, if it worked, could have been huge. But unfortunately, the technology never worked, and only a few years into this contract, Blockbuster actually ended the partnership. Here's the problem. Enron, at the beginning of the partnership, anticipated that this partnership would bring Enron over $100 million in revenue. So, on their projections and in their numbers, they added an extra $100 million. Although, in reality, the partnership brought nothing of the sort and was even ended shortly after. That's a massive oversimplification of that specific situation, although it kind of paints a picture of how they were trying to be as generous as possible when it came to their revenue numbers. Imagine the friend who always talks about the stuff they're gonna do, but you know they're never gonna do it. It's kind of like that, you know? They're counting money that's not actually in their hands yet, which in business and in life is extremely unwise. But Enron wasn't only fudging their revenue numbers, they were also hiding a lot of their debt. And they did this in a clever yet simple way. Essentially, they would take Enron's debt and pass it to side corporations that would literally only exist to hold debt. And this worked because on the balance sheet for Enron, that debt wasn't there. So let's just say for simple numbers, Enron had $100 in debt, but they only wanted to tell their investors they had $20 in debt. Well, they would have 2 side companies that would each hold $40 in debt, removing a total of $80 of debt out of Enron's accounting. This very deceptive strategy allowed Enron to essentially reduce 80% of their debt instantly without actually solving their money problems. Them over-reporting their revenue and under-reporting their debt gave millions of investors and thousands of employees false confidence in the company that they were either invested in or working for. Now, if you're familiar with publicly traded companies, you may be asking, how is this even possible? If you're publicly traded, you have to be audited. And well, they were audited, but the people that were auditing Enron were paid by Enron, and they were paid handsomely to not look too closely into things. And once again, this all began to fall apart when public scrutiny began to rear its ugly head. As in 2001, analysts and journalists both started questioning Enron's financial practices. And after further investigation, the truth came out, investors lost all confidence in the company, and the stock price collapsed within months. And unsurprisingly, in that same year, Enron filed for bankruptcy. And at the time, it was the largest corporate bankruptcy in US history, and still is one of the largest of all time. The 2 primary people to blame for this entire situation were Ken Lay, the man who founded Enron initially through the merger, and the company's CEO, Jeffrey Skilling. And because of this, both of these men were sentenced. Skilling was sentenced to 24 years, but only served 14, and also paid a $45 million fine. Ken Lay, on the other hand, actually ended up passing away at the age of 64 in between the time of trial and conviction. The collapsing house of cards for Ken Lay and Jeffrey Skilling was one thing, and honestly, I don't feel bad for them at all. But who I do feel bad for are all the investors and the over 20,000 employees who not only lost their jobs in a company that was lying to the public, but also lost their entire retirement savings, which many of these employees had almost primarily in Enron stock, which was now worthless. That is adding insult to injury. Not only did you lose your job, but your only nest egg, your only savings, your only thing that could kind of, float you between jobs was also wiped out almost essentially in an instant. And keep in mind, these 20,000 employees, I'm sure plenty of them had families and plenty of them had kids. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of these people ended up getting divorced or even ended up ending their lives because of the stress of losing their career and their entire retirement, because their boss couldn't tell the truth. And for investors that weren't employees of Enron, in total, they lost billions of dollars due to this elaborate accounting fraud. And once this entire situation was fully made public, rules and regulations in regards to accounting for publicly traded companies were severely tightened up because the Enron accounting scandal proved quite obviously that there was massive gaps where fraud could easily happen. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, let me remind you, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. These 3 examples I told are definitely 3 of the craziest global scams to ever happen in human history, but they're definitely not the only major crazy scams to ever happen. If you want more, I'd be happy to provide. Just let me know in the comments below. Things that got banned because one person ruined it. Gender reveal regret. It's no secret that expecting parents are excited about their unborn child. And because of that, they do a lot of wacky things. You know, pregnancy announcement photo shoots where the mom is holding a sign like, "I'm the turkey," and the dad's holding a sign like, "I stuffed the turkey, now it's pregnant." Baby bump progress photos like, "Anybody wants to see your belly grow?" And of course, likely the most notorious of all pregnancy traditions, the gender reveal. It's commonly accepted that one of the earliest examples of a public gender reveal came from a 2008 post from a woman named Jenna Carvanides on her Chicago Now blog titled "High Gloss and Sauce," where she announced the sex of her child using a cake. In this specific example, she sliced into her cake, the cake was pink, and the rest was history. And seemingly almost instantly after this now infamous blog, the gender reveal tradition swept the nation and has only become more and more popular, leading us to, of course, today. Like any celebration or internet trend, people are always looking to one-up the last person, leading to some pretty extreme situations, which of course leads us to why this entry is on this list. Because although the gender reveal trend is only under 2 decades old, within that time, we have gone from a simple cake blog post to literally having fires burning down tens of thousands of acres of land. Let me explain. There's no doubt in my mind that there has been a countless number of gender reveals that have gone wrong in somebody's backyard in one way or another. However, unfortunately, there has also been a handful of genuine tragedies that have taken place due to gender reveals gone wrong. One of the first notable examples happened in 2017 with the sawmill fire in Arizona. Only 9 years after the invention of the gender reveal, people were already taking it to the extreme. And for one family in Arizona, they decided that it would be a great idea to combine blue powder to signify their baby boy with tannerite, a very common and dangerous explosive. I'm assuming this young family simply wanted the tannerite to blow the blue powder into the air and have a spectacle to reveal their soon-to-be baby boy. Although, unfortunately, after the tannerite was ignited, a wildfire quickly spawned that ended up burning 46,000 acres of land that was part of the Coronado National Forest. After the fire had started, the man who started the fire, Dennis Dickey, notified the authorities. Although, when it was all said and done, it took over 800 people to stop the fire, and the fire cost $8.2 million in damages. Now, on the bright side, nobody died in the fire and no buildings were destroyed. Although 46,000 acres of land were still torched, and I can't even begin to imagine how much animal life was lost. Dennis ended up paying a $220,000 fine and served 5 years on probation. Now, as crazy as that gender reveal gone wrong sounds, it's only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to gender reveal tragedies. In 2019, for example, a grandmother was tragically killed in Iowa by a piece of flying shrapnel from an improvised explosive device that was meant to be used as a gender reveal explosion, but unfortunately ended up being a homemade pipe bomb, which led to the tragic demise of the soon-to-be grandmother. In 2020, a faulty gender reveal pyrotechnic device started the now infamous El Dorado fire in California that not only destroyed 22,000 acres of forest, but also destroyed homes, caused evacuations, and even caused the death of a firefighter. In 2021, a father-to-be was killed by a prototype gender reveal device in New York simply because it malfunctioned and tragically killed him and injured his younger brother. And finally, in 2023, another plane crashed during a gender reveal party when it was supposed to be dropping pink powder from the plane, but instead the plane tragically lost a wing and the pilot unfortunately died on the way to the hospital after the crash. I think you guys get the picture. A lot of messed up things have happened because of gender reveals. Which now brings us back to the original point of this video. What got banned because of all of these horrible gender reveal tragedies? And the unsatisfying truth is that nothing did. Although there is a reason for that, so let me explain. For starters, it's kind of impossible for the government or really any jurisdiction to just outright ban gender reveals. There's just too much gray zone there, and I don't even think that's honestly going to be helpful. And in the cases of a lot of these gender reveals, the things that they were already doing was illegal. Like, for example, making a homemade explosive was already banned in the first place. And while it's tragic that people lost their lives because of this, the government can't ban something that's already banned. And in the cases of the multiple forest fires caused by different gender reveals, starting forest fires is already illegal. And in places like California and most places in the country that are vulnerable to forest fires, during dry seasons, having things like campfires are already restricted or even banned to prevent forest fires. And considering these forest fires happened during the dry season, I would assume that the people that caused these forest fires did not have permission to set off explosives in these dry forests. Although, just because it is nearly impossible to ban these sorts of gender reveals legally, that doesn't mean that they haven't been banned socially. And what I mean is that because there has been so many different environmental tragedies and obviously losses of life because of dangerous and extravagant gender reveals, a vast majority of people have come to the conclusion that doing these outrageous stunts for gender reveals is completely unacceptable. And for that reason, people have stopped doing them in recent years because they know that the reaction is not going to be what they want. People are not going to be celebrating them, they are going to be judging them for continuing to do things that have been proven to be dangerous. And while you could argue that something being banned socially is a bit of a technicality here, I would definitely argue that the attention seekers who are doing these massive displays are more worried about the social ban than the legal ban, because most of them already broke the law to try to do these things. So if you wanted to pick one person that ruined it for everybody, pick any name off the list of people that unfortunately had accidents caused by their gender reveal. Although if you really want to nail this one down to its core, the original inventor of the gender reveal did later go on to admit that she regrets ever making the gender reveal trend because of how crazy it got. And while I obviously personally don't blame her for anything that happened, there is an argument to be made that she could be the one person that ruined gender reveals for everybody, simply because she created them and people took them way too far. The Stickum situation. If you're a bro watching this video right now, then I would bet money that there's definitely been a time or two when you've gotten your hands a little bit sticky. However, I would also bet that there has never been a time when you've gotten your hands so sticky that you've won a Super Bowl ring. That is, of course, unless your name is Lester Hayes. Lester Hayes was born in 1955 and played professional football in the NFL from 1977 to 1968. And Lester was no bench warmer. He won 2 separate Super Bowls, won NFL Defense Player of the Year in 1980. He was a 4-time first-team All-Pro and played in 5 separate Pro Bowl games, among other accomplishments as well. I mention all of this to say that this man was a force in the NFL back in the day. Such a force, in fact, that this man actually caused the NFL to change their rules. In 1977, during his rookie year, Lester was exposed to an adhesive substance known as Stickum. And Stickum, for lack of a better explanation, was literally just a sticky spray that was specifically meant for sports. At the time, using Stickum was perfectly legal, and the industry standard was to spray Stickum onto your hands so it was easier to catch a ball. And once Lester was actually able to use and play with Stickum, it was a complete game changer, literally. And ironically, Lester even said himself that prior to using Stickum, he, quote, couldn't catch a cold in Antarctica. And while I find that hard to believe because I would imagine you have to be able to catch a ball to, play in the NFL, I think what he's really doing is emphasizing how helpful Stickum was. Which is probably why he decided to not only spray his gloves with Stickum, but his entire body. That's right. After noticing the benefits of spraying Stickum directly to his hands, Lester decided that he could probably get even more benefits if he lathered it on his arms, his uniform, his helmet, and any other substance that could be helpful. And, well, it was helpful. Potentially so helpful, in fact, that his team, the Los Angeles Raiders, literally won the Super Bowl. Which is likely why, in the following year, in 1981, the NFL literally banned Stickum altogether, meaning that nobody could use it, not even just on their gloves like they were previously. Making this a clear-cut example of one person ruining something for everybody. Although, it doesn't stop there, because there is actual proof showing that Stickum was a massive benefit to Lester Hayes. In the first 4 seasons of Lester's pro career, he was able to gather 25 interceptions. However, in the 6 seasons following the Stickum ban, he only had a total of 14 interceptions, meaning that in more time, he got significantly less. To me, kind of proving that Stickum was definitely a helpful tool that he unfortunately screwed himself and every player out of. Cave chaos. I think it's a universal experience at this point to be laying in bed late at night, watching YouTube, only to be recommended a video of somebody deep underground in a crevice no human should go in for a reason that I could not even begin to fathom. That's right, I'm talking about these crazy cave diving videos. And obviously, these people have the worst hobby of all time. But believe it or not, they are still people and things can be ruined for them too. And unfortunately, in this instance, one man's caving trip gone wrong not only ended up ending his life, but also ended the usage of an iconic cave. Let me explain. The year is 1960. And Dale Green and his friends just happened to be exploring some grounds in Utah when they happened to find a hole in the ground. And this hole in the ground leads to an insane cave system with different chutes, tunnels, and rooms kind of scattered all over the place. On top of just being a cave that was extremely tight in some areas, the entire cave had a clay-like texture that was very similar to silly putty both on the ceiling and on the floor. And even though Dale Green and his friends discovered an unexplored cave that was covered in brown goo, they knew they had to go in. Since discovery of that cave by Dale Green and his friends in 1960, the cave has kind of grown a cult following and was even named the Nutty Putty Cave because of the silly putty-like texture of the mud that is found in most of the cave. So far, personally, I'm not sold. Brown goo in tight spaces is not a combo that I'm a personal fan of. Although, to some people, that's exactly what they're looking for. And in 2006, it was estimated that the Nutty Putty Cave was receiving over 5,000 visitors per year, most of which who were going in at night without proper equipment or tools, making rescue operations not uncommon. And speaking of rescue operations, there is also 4 separate rescue operations that took place specifically to save Boy Scouts. And you would think after the second or third group of Boy Scouts, this would be an activity to leave off the list, but I guess not. Regardless, from its interesting discovery in the 1960s to its unfortunate closure in 2009, the Nutty Putty Cave was an iconic attraction for both amateur and professional cavers, and Boy Scouts for some reason. Now, focusing in on that unfortunate situation that took place in 2009, I'm sure at least some of you have heard about the Nutty Putty Cave by now, and kind of know the story, which is why I'll keep this part a bit brief. But for those who are not informed, let me give you a rundown. On November 24th, 2009, a 26-year-old man named John Edward Jones unfortunately became stuck upside down in the Nutty Putty Cave. John had initially entered the cave with a large party of cavers. However, at some point during this exploration, him and 3 other cavers had left the party to go search for a part of the cave known as the birth canal, which is already disturbing. Regardless, during this pursuit of finding the birth canal, John mistakenly went into an undiscovered part of the cave, which he believed to be the birth canal, but in reality it was something known as Ed's Push. Now, Ed's Push was actually a dead end. However, John believed that he could potentially turn around if he just enters this drop, which is why he entered this part of the cave head first, but unfortunately instantly became wedged upside down. The area of the cave that he became stuck in was literally only 25 centimeters wide and 46 centimeters long, basically 10 by 18 inches. Not big at all. And it was also 400 feet into the cave already. So not only was he stuck upside down, but he was deep into this cave. When John's friends found him in this extremely compromised position, they instantly went to go find help. And luckily, help came quick, and a large team of rescue workers and experienced cavers were on the scene to try to help remove John from this cave. They used drills to try to widen gaps, they used pulleys to try to pull him out by his feet, but unfortunately, after everything they tried, nothing was working. And after 27 hours of being stuck, John passed away the following day, causing a major tragedy and one of the most infamous cave disasters in modern history. After it was confirmed that John had died in the cave, the rescuers who were working on trying to save his life determined that it was too dangerous to try to remove his body. And with the approval of the owner of the land and John's family, a mutual agreement was made to seal up the cave forever, making this cave John's final resting place and a memorial to John himself. Now, logically, but also kind of morbidly, one of the ways that they went about sealing this cave was by using explosives to explode the area where John was to ensure that the deadly passageway was collapsed, meaning that his body would never be accessed, and of course, this part of the cave could never be entered again, because it would no longer exist. But it's also kind of, in a morbid way, funny to think about, yeah, he's stuck in that cave, let's blow him up. Like, obviously they didn't do it on purpose, but they did literally blow him up. Morbidity aside, besides just exploding that one part of the cave, they also sealed every entrance into the cave, ensuring that this cave was impossible to enter ever again. Now, obviously, to some, this decision made total sense, but to others, it was rather controversial, and there was multiple Facebook petitions created to save the cave, meaning that they were recognizing that what happened was tragic, but they didn't think that everybody had to suffer. Although all of these petitions failed, and everybody who tried to enter the cave after this tragedy was also apprehended by security because, well, of course there was break-in attempts, although all, or at least many of them, were failures. Now, I want to tread a bit lightly here because realistically, although the actions of John Edward Jones did ruin something for everybody by having this very popular cave be closed forever, I don't necessarily want to put too much blame on him because I don't believe it was his fault. I believe he, if anything, was a victim of circumstance, and it could have really happened to anybody. People make mistakes, and this situation was extremely tragic. So while one action did ruin people having fun in a cave, it ultimately ruined his life and the life of those who loved him. And I do feel like it is important to recognize that. I know this video is supposed to be fun and lighthearted, but yeah. The price predicament. If you're anything like me, then you had a similar experience growing up. You either stay home from school because you're sick, pretending to be sick, or it's a snow day. And while you're excited to be home from school, you are now met with one of the most odd phenomenon of all time: daytime television. That's right, the TV looks the same, but for some reason, every channel you flip to is showing you shows you never usually see. I don't know about you, but for me, daytime television is a core memory of staying home from school. And one of the shows I felt like I saw most during the day was a game show known as The Price is Right. This game show originally aired in 1972 and has been on the air since, making it the longest running game show of all time. And because this game show has been so long running and so iconic, there has been some very interesting situations associated with it, one of which I'm about to explain. Theodore, or Ted Slauson, was an elementary school math teacher with a big secret. He was a mega fan of The Price is Right. He claimed in an interview that he started watching the show at the age of 6, and he said that he spent his entire early life fascinated with the show, studying every episode he could find with the goal of memorizing the products and the prices of the products shown on screen. This hobby became such a pastime for Ted that when he turned 18, he began traveling to follow the show wherever it went, with the goal of being a contestant on as many shows as possible. In a documentary made about his story, which we'll get into later, he confirmed that he's been to at least 37 tapings of the show. And while he wasn't a contestant 37 times, he was definitely participating in every taping he went to. And that's because if he was not a contestant on the show, he was in the crowd. And as per Price is Right rules, if you're in the crowd, you can yell out prices. And let's just say the numbers that Ted were yelling out were not just educated guesses. They were more similar to fact than assumption. And the reason I say this is because as Ted studied The Price is Right, he noticed that there was multiple items that were showcased in multiple episodes that had the exact same price. And he used this pattern that he recognized to begin finding as many patterns as possible. And what he eventually ended up doing was creating a paper database of every single item ever featured on the show and its price. And of course, this database was updated with every new product shown, meaning that there were situations where Ted had a very significant advantage when estimating the prices of certain items. And realistically, this wasn't an estimate at all. It was just memorized. Like, he had verifiable proof of what these items costed, and that data was backed up from previous episodes. Regardless, Ted was able to use his 35 years of Price is Right study and put it to good use. And he has provably helped multiple people win major prizes on The Price is Right. And at least twice, Ted has yelled out prices to contestants that were so close to the exact price or perfect bid that the contestants who listened to his advice were able to win the perfect bid and literally get both showcase prizes, which were basically the two Big Daddy prizes of the entire game, typically totaling anywhere from $10,000 to more. And this was kind of a win-win-win, because Ted would get the satisfaction of being able to use his information to help people. The contestant, if they were lucky enough to hear Ted and informed enough to listen to Ted specifically, would be able to win massive prizes. And of course, The Price is Right would be making great television, because who doesn't want to see people win the big prize? It was truly a no-lose situation. That was until one episode took place. In 2007, during a taping of The Price is Right, a contestant named Terry was not only able to bid on the showcase item with a small margin of error, but he was able to perfectly guess the price of the showcase item, not only of course awarding himself this item, but also shocking the show hosts and producers. And I'm not joking when I say this. After Terry made the perfect guess on the final item, there was a longer than normal commercial break that took place afterwards because the show producers were trying to figure out how Terry was cheating. Although that pursuit was unsuccessful, Terry won, and interestingly, the story does not end there. Because during this taping, guess who was present in the audience? Our friend Ted Slauson. Somebody who is always at these tapings, always sitting in the front row, and had a history of yelling nearly perfect, if not perfect prices to people, helping them win things like vacations and cars and cash. With all of this being said, and of course Ted confirming that he yelled the perfect price to Terry, it's obvious that Ted helped Terry win. Although Terry has never, ever publicly credited Terry for ever helping him, and Terry claims that he just came up with a number out of thin air, which I call total BS on. And while that drama and story goes kind of deeper, there's an entire movie about it, which is super cool, which is why I'm kind of hyped on the drama. It's called The Perfect Bid, The Contestant Who Knew Too Much, and I'd recommend checking it out. It's an interesting, indie doc. Besides Ted not getting the credit he deserved for helping Terry win, Ted also caused The Price is Right to finally take action on reusing game prizes. Because at this point, the game show knew that people could memorize the prices and it wasn't necessarily too much of a secret. They knew that there was some superfans and if they wanted to yell, they could, and it didn't disrupt the show too much. But when Terry made a perfect bid, they realized that at least for them, the jig was up and they had to be more sneaky. Which is why after 2008, The Price is Right put in a lot more effort in not only changing the variety of prizes they used, but also the types of prizes. So for example, what they would do is instead of just having the same car in every episode, they would have the same car, but with different features. And of course, different features would affect the price, meaning that they could maintain product partnerships, which I would assume they had for these prizes, although the price could be different every episode, therefore nullifying the memorization strategy, and also ruining that strategy for everybody. And while I could yap a lot more about Ted and the interesting situation of, well, the Price is Right scandal, the moral of the story is this. If you wanted to dedicate 35 years to studying The Price is Right, you could gamify the show. But ever since 2008, that's become a lot harder. And speaking of things that have gotten harder since 2008, no, I'm not making a joke, being a YouTuber. So I wanted to just quickly say thank you guys for making my dream come true and watching my videos. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe to the channel because we post new videos every single Friday. And also, if you want a part 3 about things that got banned, leave a like on this video so I know you guys want it. I love making series that you guys want to see, so if you would like a third installment, feel free to let me know by either leaving a like or comment part 3 below. You guys are the best. And now let's get to the final entry on this video. Marketing misery. I know everybody watching this video right now has an email inbox full of spam. Brands sending you deals, scammers sending you scams, grandma still sending e-postcards, and a very real Nigerian prince looking to send you money. Regardless, email marketing is a massive part of today's advertising landscape. But did you know that there was a time when email was a thing and email marketing wasn't? That time, I could only imagine, was blissful. But believe it or not, it was also short-lived because it didn't take long for somebody to send the first mass email and instantly have email marketing regulated forever. Let me set the scene. It's the late 1970s and email was still new. Although at this time in the 1970s, it was only really used by universities, governments, and researchers. And for them, it was a tool to quickly and efficiently communicate. So far, so good. And honestly, I'm shocked to hear that there was email in the 1970s, or at least an early version of it. Regardless, this early email was known as ARPANET, or Advanced Research Projects Agency Network. And if you're following along, those two don't add up. On May 3rd, 1979, a man by the name of Gary Thurk had a brilliant idea. He was using this ARPANET or early email service and realized one thing. He could send an email not only to individuals, but to everybody. And he learned this because of instances that happened earlier. For example, 7 years earlier in 1971, the first spam email ever was sent by an MIT system administrator. Although this email was not malicious or marketing based at all. It was simply a message directed to everybody in his personal contact book. But for some, that planted a seed. And whether or not Gary was actually inspired by this, I have no idea. But 7 years later, he did his own version of this spam email. On this fateful day in 1978, Gary decided to send an email to all of the 400 users he had in his contact book on the ARPANET email system. But this email was not a hello or not an address or not an update. It was an advertisement for the Digital Equipment Corporation and their new DEC System 20, which was a 32-bit digital equipment mainframe computer, which literally looks like an AC unit. But I guess that's computers in the 70s for you. But regardless, even though this email only went to a measly 400 people, because the product it was advertising was so expensive and the people that were targeted through this email marketing were so specific, it has been reported, but not confirmed, that this one, likely very first email blast ever generated $13 million in sales, which is just insane. And while that may sound amazing for this company, I'm sure it was very annoying for the receivers and the beginning of a very annoying trend that would go on for likely the rest of the emails and internet's existence. Besides all of the revenue that was supposedly generated from this email, there was also a lot of complaints generated, which is why an APRNet service representative forced Gary Thurk to apologize to everybody and promise to never do it again. And surprisingly, he kept to his word, and for nearly over a decade, there was no more marketing emails to be seen. Although with the later introduction of actual email, or at least email as we know it today, and of course online marketing in general, as well as mass adoption of the internet, email marketing became very popular once again. And in the early 2000s, serious campaigns were put in place to help prevent spam emails and viruses and other things that were extremely rampant during this time. And while official rules and regulations around email marketing came way later, I feel like the story of Gary Thurk and the first marketed email blast ever was definitely the antithesis of email marketing and the eventual regulation of it. So to answer the question of who ruined what, well, Gary Thurk ruined email marketing for everybody, because not only did he ruin email inboxes for people that just wanted to communicate, he also ruined email marketing for marketers because he got the practice of email marketing on the radar of legislators, and it wasn't long before it was regulated, which I do think is a net positive because, well, sending everybody in the world a virus or a coupon code to their inbox isn't really ideal. So yeah, even though they're not necessarily directly correlated, I thought the story was interesting and a really cool example of the first email marketer ever. And as somebody with a background in marketing, I thought it was kind of cool. Common things science still can't explain. Fingerprints. That's right. The first entry on this list is something that we all have access to at our fingertips. And that's because it literally is our fingertips, or more specifically, our fingerprints. I think we all know that everybody has fingerprints, and beyond that, we all have unique fingerprints. And we also know that the fingerprints your cousin leaves on the glass in every device is really annoying. But beyond the existence and uniqueness of fingerprints, what is there not to know? And the answer is, well, the purpose of fingerprints to begin with. Interestingly, we actually know a lot more about the origin of fingerprints rather than the purpose of fingerprints. Obviously, in modern times, the fingerprint is an extremely useful tool, most commonly used in forensics investigations and also while opening your iPhone 6. And while those are definitely interesting use cases for our fingertips, the human body didn't spend hundreds of thousands of years just to develop fingerprints for biometric data purposes. And like the title of this video suggests, the true purpose of fingerprints is still relatively unknown, although there is two primary theories. But before we get into those, I want to actually explain quickly how we even get fingerprints in the first place. When you were a little fetus in your mother's womb, your fingerprints surprisingly were one of the earliest defining features developed on your entire body, obviously after your arms and hands. And these unique designs are carved into your fingertips through the pressure of amniotic fluid in your mother's womb. The pressure of this fluid, coupled with the growth rate of your fingers and other unique factors, are what cause the consistently unique design of your fingerprint, which is really interesting. Your fingerprint isn't genetic whatsoever, and identical twins do not share the same fingerprint. And that same fingerprint you develop early on in your mother's womb, you will keep until the day you die, which is also super interesting. But not quite as interesting as the two running theories on why we even have fingerprints in the first place. The first theory is that we have fingerprints to improve grip. This theory states that the grooves on your finger act like tread on a tire and are intended to allow you to grip, hold, and throw things easier. And this theory makes sense and is definitely valid, and there is even evidence to support this claim. And the other primary theory for why we have fingerprints is actually for tactile reasons. This theory states that we have fingerprints to help us sense vibrations and to feel textures more fully and effectively, enhancing our sense of touch. And once again, there is evidence to support this claim as well. And while both of these theories are valid and seem extremely logical, and both share evidence that can back up their claims, there's not yet any concrete evidence proving a specific purpose for your fingerprint. Alzheimer's. If you're watching this video, it's likely that you don't have Alzheimer's. But if you do have Alzheimer's, then it's likely you've seen this video before and just don't remember it. Regardless, Alzheimer's is unfortunately more common than you think, and most people watching this video have likely experienced Alzheimer's in one way or another. The reality of Alzheimer's is horrifying and truly upsetting, and that is coming from a bystander's perspective. I can only imagine the experience of somebody dealing with the trauma firsthand. But for how common Alzheimer's is and how much awareness is being brought to it these days, there are still so many things that are just completely unknown when it comes to Alzheimer's. I think it's important to note first and foremost that Alzheimer's and dementia are not the same thing, and while they are related, they're not interchangeable. And on top of that, Alzheimer's is not a natural part of human progression. While cognitive decline is normal as you age, the rapid and detrimental decline that happens with Alzheimer's is nowhere near normal. And for that reason, it's not called old-timers, it's called Alzheimer's. And I'm not even making this up. When I was a kid, I swear to God, I thought it was called old-timers because old people got it. And I'm just really hoping I'm not the only one who thought that. But tossing my own personal cognitive decline to the side, what is the cause of Alzheimer's? And the answer is complicated. As of today, the most common theory is that a combination of age-related brain changes, genetic factors, and environmental and lifestyle influences play a role in the development of Alzheimer's, although the exact biological root cause of the disease is still unknown. Basically meaning that there's a lot of ways you could potentially get Alzheimer's, like smoking all your life, or working shift work and having a bad circadian rhythm, or potentially being genetically predisposed. And while all of these may be a contributing factor, there's not yet one underlying causality. But with that being said, as of now, there are still two primary biomarkers that are believed to be tied to Alzheimer's. The first is amyloid beta plaques. And what amyloid beta plaques are actually buildup of amyloid beta, which is a part of amyloid precursor protein. What does amyloid precursor protein do in the brain, you might ask? Science doesn't know that either, but it's believed, but not proven, to have something to do with brain development. Regardless, patients with Alzheimer's will see this amyloid beta protein not being properly absorbed in the brain, causing it to clump together and create plaques, causing the eventual rapid decline in cognition. And the reason for this is because these amyloid plaques are actually toxic to the brain and cause cell death within your brain, which is why typically in Alzheimer's patients, you will see brains with massive holes in them, which honestly just adds a whole new layer of disturbing to this disease. But even the role of these amyloid plaques are debated, because recently there have been medications specifically designed to destroy these amyloid plaques in the brain. And unfortunately, these tests have not bred positive results, which has caused scientists to question whether or not this plaque is the root cause or simply a byproduct of a deeper, more unknown root cause. Oh yeah, and the other biomarker associated with Alzheimer's is another protein used in the brain known as tau. And similar to the other protein we just discussed, for patients with Alzheimer's, the tau in the brain is not used properly and is not absorbed and becomes tangled and creates, once again, toxic clumps in the brain, causing cell death and cognitive decline. So yeah, although it may seem like we know quite a bit about Alzheimer's, there's so much more we have to learn before we are able to make any sort of meaningful development in prevention and hopefully cure. Animal migration. Migration by far is one of the most underrated animal superpowers. Like seriously, just imagine being able to be anywhere and being able to then navigate to a specific location, usually across an entire continent, just because. Migration is a necessary survival mechanism for countless species of animals. And it's actually really well understood why certain species migrate. The reason depends on the species, but the most common reasons for migration are either to feed, breed, or to escape harsh climates like cold winters or hot summers. And that is simple and something we truly understand. But it's not the why of migration that's unexplained, it's the how. Like just think about it. How do these animals know consistently year over year not only when to go, but exactly where to go? You could give a lot of people today a car and a physical roadmap and they would still get lost trying to go to a specific location. But if you just tell a butterfly that they've got to fly 2,000 miles to get laid, they're already gone before you could even tell them what direction to go. And it's so amazing, in fact, that we still to this day don't understand how animals know where to migrate, or more specifically, how to get to their point of migration. Birds, whales, sea turtles, and even insects are all examples of animals that migrate. And for most of them, the places they go to migrate are rather specific, although where they may be living in their off-season is kind of random. However, every year, they consistently know, no matter where they are, where to go. And that phenomenon is truly amazing. And while in 2025, humans have GPS, Google Maps, and now self-driving cars, we still get lost a lot. And this thought process has led researchers researchers to believe that animals have something that we don't. And recent studies have shown that this could potentially be true. And one example that research has recently shown was that some species of birds, specifically pigeons, were able to sense the Earth's magnetic field. And first of all, I'm just curious how they even found this out in the first place. Like, I can only imagine two scientists just sitting a pigeon down in the lab, looking at him and just asking, "Do you feel anything?" With the pigeon only to respond, "North." And this is a skill known as magnetoreception. And I'll be honest, I wish I had magnetoreception, because that sounds cool as hell. Regardless, with the discovery of pigeons being able to sense the Earth's literal magnetic field, this one answer has led to many more questions. Like, how many other animals share this ability? And what other abilities exist in the animal kingdom that we don't even know about yet? And for animals with this ability, how do they even use this knowledge of the magnetic field to navigate properly and accurately? It's truly amazing. And I guess the human equivalent of this would be trying to understand how your broke, drunken uncle always makes his way down to Florida every time winter comes in Michigan. Like, your drunken uncle could be anywhere in the northern hemisphere for 7 months out of the year. But somehow, as soon as it just gets a little chilly, he teleports to Florida. But nobody knows how he got there. It's just like that. The placebo effect. The placebo effect is a staple in modern medicine testing because of how prevalent this effect is. To summarize the placebo effect, it's essentially just suggestibility. It's your mind believing something to be true and your body kind of following suit. And while that's a bit of an oversimplification, the results of the placebo effect are amazing, but also mysterious. The placebo effect is so strong and so common that anytime a new drug is tested to bring to market, they literally have to test the new drug that's being proposed against a placebo to make sure that the drug is actually effective and not just seeming effective due to the placebo effect. For example, let's just say you're trying to develop a new drug that helps people with stomach pain. Now, let's say for a study, you find 100 people that have frequent stomach pain. You divide this group into two smaller groups, a treatment group and a placebo group. All 50 people in the treatment group receive the actual medication you're testing, and all 50 people in the placebo group receive, well, a sugar pill, a placebo, a drug that does nothing. It's not even a drug. Now, here's the kicker. Everybody in this test is under the assumption that they are actually taking the active medicine. And after consistently taking the medicine for, let's say, a week, you have to review the results. And this is where the placebo effect actually comes into play. Because let's say after a week of taking the placebo, 25 out of the 50 people in the placebo group say that they noticed less stomach pain. That is kind of the benchmark that the treatment group has to surpass. Meaning that if the treatment group also reports a 25% decrease in stomach pain, it's actually not proven effective. In that case, it's about as effective as a placebo. For this medication for stomach pain to be proven effective, there has to be more people in the treatment group that feel better than people in the placebo group. And this oversimplified, poorly explained explanation is what's known as a double-blind placebo study. And it's kind of the gold standard for eliminating bias when it comes to testing brand new medications. Now, here's the thing. With all of this being said, how does the placebo effect even work? And the answer is, we actually don't know that much about it. Researchers that have been studying the placebo effect from a psychological and neurological angle both kind of believe that this effect is linked to a brain's release of endorphins and other chemicals in the anticipation of a positive effect. Essentially meaning that because your body is expecting to feel better, it already kind of feels better in advance. But this isn't proven and is really only a going theory. And despite there being literally decades of study on the placebo effect up until this point, the exact mechanisms behind the placebo effect are completely unknown, making one of these staples of modern medicine testing an effective and life-saving mystery. The Twilight Zone. No, not that Twilight Zone, this Twilight Zone. Home of this, and this. The Twilight Zone is located 200 to 1,000 meters below the ocean surface. And it's known as the Twilight Zone because it is a region underwater where sunlight barely penetrates. It's too dark for any sort of photosynthesis, but it's not quite pitch black yet. And it's this unique region that is one of the least explored habitats on all of planet Earth. One notable resident of this area is the lanternfish, which is pretty cool, but also completely insane and kind of goes to show how weird this area is. Like, we all know that jellyfish are like just weird creatures, but deep sea jellyfish are on a whole nother level. Like, I was just watching a documentary where some jellyfish literally asexually reproduce and basically just spawn new jellyfish, kind of like plants. And jellyfish as a whole are just kind of crazy entities. Like they're alive, but they're not. It's just so wild. But that's not the mystery here. It has nothing to do with jellyfish per se. The Twilight Zone, like I mentioned, is one of the least explored areas, and for good reason too. The pressure that deep underwater is immense, and coupling that pressure with the sheer darkness and travel time and specialized equipment required to even navigate through this area makes any sort of Twilight Zone exploration extremely expensive and difficult. And because there's not really a major financial incentive to explore the Twilight Zone, research is definitely a bit slow. But not only is the Twilight Zone extremely harsh to get to and be in, but it's also extremely vast, making exploring and documenting it nearly impossible fully. And because the Twilight Zone is so massive, it's actually speculated that there may be more fish in the Twilight Zone alone than all other fish on the entire Earth combined. And while this is kind of a fruitless thought experiment, at this point, it's also extremely possible. But not only is it possible, it's a scary thought, because the fish that live in the Twilight Zone are completely weird looking, and probably the closest thing we have to aliens at this time. Like, these fish are literally creating their own light, which is kind of dope. I don't know, I think bioluminescence is just cool to begin with, but I also like to think that fish just got so fed up of being in the dark that they literally created their own organic light. But it's not just seeing cool fish that light up that makes the Twilight Zone interesting. It's also the impact that the Twilight Zone has on the Earth's climate, because the Twilight Zone is a massive ecosystem. An ocean and marine ecosystems specifically play a major role when it comes to carbon storage, which obviously has a direct impact on the Earth's climate, which definitely gives merit to wanting to explore the Twilight Zone more. But yeah, that's kind of all there is to say about it. The Twilight Zone is one of the most common ecosystems in all of the world, technically speaking, although it's one of the ecosystems we know the least about. And maybe that's for the better. Ball lightning. Admittedly, ball lightning isn't all that common, but lightning is relatively common. And I think most of us have heard about ball lightning, and honestly, I just thought it was cool and wanted to discuss this interesting phenomenon. Ball lightning sightings have gone back all the way to the 1600s and continue to be reported today. It's interesting because even today in 2025, we don't know a ton about ball lightning. So I can only imagine what they thought about ball lightning in the 1600s. Ironically, we do know what they thought about ball lightning in the 1800s, as there was a few recorded accounts of experiences with ball lightning, and they basically just described ball lightning as smelling like sulfur and being the work of the devil, which I think is fitting for the time period. In case you're unfamiliar, ball lightning is typically described by witnesses as a glowing, floating sphere of light, and like regular lightning, typically only appears during thunderstorms. Some people have stated that these balls are only as small as a marble, while others have said that they've been multiple feet long and wide. And the colors that the ball lightning has been reported in is almost as vast as the size, with some people claiming that it was white, yellow, orange, or even blue. But in case ball lightning wasn't unpredictable enough, the way it behaves is also completely unpredictable. Ball lightning can last anywhere from a split second to multiple minutes long. And during the duration of its stay, it typically moves slowly through the air and can even pass through windows or walls, typically causing no damage whatsoever. And in some cases, ball lightning simply vanishes silently. And in other cases, it literally explodes with a loud bang. And already, ball lightning seems like one of the most amazing and also terrifying things you could witness in person. And I can only imagine what witnessing it would be like if you didn't know what ball lightning was. There's actually a video of a Belarusian train station that shows a ball of lightning crossing over all of the train tracks, and it's just amazing to see. And in the comments of this video, there's a ton of people talking about their experience with ball lightning and how the first time they saw it, they thought it was an angel or a ghost or something else that was typically supernatural, which I don't blame them for. If I just saw this thing in front of me in person, I would literally believe I was losing my mind or something really bad was happening. Like, I would not be in awe, I would be in terror. But that's just me. If I don't know about something, I typically lean towards being scared about it. But no matter how cool or interesting or terrifying ball lightning may seem, it's more mysterious than anything else. Obviously, scientists don't have a concrete answer on what ball lightning is or what even causes it. But there are a few interesting theories I'd like to share with you. A couple popular theories that try to explain why ball lightning happens include plasma, burning particles in the air, and even electromagnetic fields. And honestly, they're all kind of vague explanations and potentially could be partially true, but like I mentioned, we just don't know. And one of the biggest reasons why we don't know is because of how rare ball lightning is. It's almost impossible to replicate in a controlled environment, meaning that we're at the mercy of nature providing it to us to study it. And as you can imagine, ball lightning doesn't roll into a lot of labs all that often. And well-equipped scientists typically don't run into ball lightning all that often either, leaving a lot of the thought around ball lightning to be up to speculation and based off of reviewing videos posted online. And if you've made it this far in the video, let me know. If you saw ball lightning out in the wild, would you be terrified or would you be intrigued? I think the honest answer is both. And I guess while we're being honest, let me ask you, do you like watching Trust Me Bro videos? Because if you do, feel free to subscribe. We make videos every single week. Now, let's get on to the last section. Slime mold. Slime mold, or scientifically known as Physarum polycephalum, is not mold, nor slime, nor fungi. It's actually known as a protist. And what makes it unique is that it's actually a single-celled organism. That's right, this jelly-looking, goo-looking thing is actually one organism, although it is full of nuclei. That's right, it might be a single cell, but this one cell has so many nuclei within it. And all of these nuclei actually will come in handy later. Now you might be asking, what's the significance of this yellowy, greeny goo? And is it even common? I've never seen that. And let me answer both of those questions. First of all, is it common? Yeah. If you've gone on a walk in a forest after a rainy day, you have definitely walked past some sort of slime mold. And to answer your first hypothetical question, why does it matter? Well, slime molds are extremely intelligent. So intelligent, in fact, that we don't know how they're so smart or why they're so smart. And that is both interesting and terrifying. How smart is slime mold, you may ask? Well, slime molds have been shown time in and time out to solve mazes consistently. And how they do this is by basically filling up the entire maze with their gooey body. And once they find the exit of the maze, or in the case of the research test, finding the food, they will then retract everything else that isn't directly connecting the start of the slime mold to the food, allowing them to essentially reverse engineer the maze. And these mazes aren't simple either. Some studies have actually been able to have slime molds recreate major transportation networks, like the Tokyo subway system, for example. But not only can slime mold navigate to find food, they've also shown to have some sort of memory by anticipating reoccurring events. And how this is shown is by having them readjust their behavior based off of previous events that have happened in previous studies, proving that these single-celled organisms have some sort of memory even though they have not one neuron. That's right, slime molds have no brain, no nervous system, no complex organs, but they still seemingly can solve problems, make decisions, and even remember past events. And I'll be the first to say it, I'm impressed with this little ball of goo. And this little ball of goo might even be smarter than you. But if you think the ball of goo is not smaller than you, then for who the ball of goo is not smaller than you too? Okay, it is currently 1:53 a.m. and I thought that was funny. I didn't even think that was funny, I just said it. Regardless, the ways in which slime molds achieves any sort of intelligence to scientists is completely unclear. Although, like some of the other entries on this list, the scientists have their theories. And what's currently believed is that the network-like structure of neurons within the slime mold allows the slime mold to process information through chemical signals, essentially allowing it to have a brain without having a brain. And this method of thinking, or I guess thoughtlessness, on the slime mold's part has actually inspired scientists in specific fields like robotics and computing to try to use slime molds to find clues on how to build more efficient self-organizing systems, seeing as the slime mold's pretty good at doing that. And while there's not much more known about the slime mold's intelligence at this time, the fact that this single-celled organism can seemingly think without a brain has definitely inspired engineers and scientists alike. But for now, the mind of this little ball of goo is an enigma. How to survive the deadliest animal attacks. You and your best bro are sitting on the couch watching TV. It almost seemed like this day could not get any more boring. And just as you were starting to get into the show on the television, it cuts to a commercial break. It was actually a commercial for a brand new experimental zoo that had just opened in your city. And as soon as you and your bro heard zoo and brand new, both of your ears perked up. One of the most interesting things that it was advertising was a safety course on how to survive the most common and deadly animal attacks. Now, since at this point you and your bro had already survived countless deadly locations, as well as numerous deadly survival myths, you figured why not take the opportunity to now also learn about how to survive deadly animal attacks. And without any further convincing required, you and your bro quickly change into your explorer outfits and you head to the zoo. As you and your friend arrive, you notice something peculiar. The parking lot is absolutely empty, and the zoo itself is massive. And it honestly doesn't even look like a zoo. It looks more like a prison, with walls that go endlessly into the horizon. And as you walked into the zoo and met the coordinator, you were informed that the TV ad was a bit misleading, that it actually wasn't a safety course, it was more of a crash course. However, there was a cash prize to be won if the crash course was completed successfully. And since you and your bro were not only bored, but broke, you figured, what did you have to lose? And with that, the coordinator led you to two massive steel doors. You and your friend walk in, and the doors slammed behind you. As you and your bro look ahead of you, you realize that this zoo is nothing like any zoo you've ever seen. There was no cages or doors or trails. It was literally just wilderness directly in front of you. Besides one table that had one pamphlet on it. And as you pick up this pamphlet, you see that it reads Animal Survival Guide. And as you begin to read it, you hear a voice over a PA system. That voice was the coordinator. And the coordinator tells you if you want to make it out of this challenge alive, you need to follow the rules in this pamphlet to a T. And they also inform you that every animal you encounter is going to be getting bigger in size as you get deeper into the enclosure. At this point, you and your bro know that you have bitten off way more than you could chew, and this was definitely not what you signed up for. But at this point, you had no other option. So you begin to walk into the wooded area. As you and your bro become fully immersed in the woods, you realize that while the circumstances may be a bit peculiar, you're in a rather beautiful location. The leaves are green, the trees are healthy, the grass is green, the flowers are plentiful, and you even notice that there is beehives and bees flying around. And while your bro decides to walk up to the flowers and approach the bees, you open the pamphlet and realize the first animal attack you have to survive is actually bees, the smallest creature in this entire zoo. And as you read through the pamphlet, you see that the first thing it emphasizes is that with bee attacks, prevention is key. Meaning that if you want to survive, or at least in this case, avoid a bee attack, the best way to do so is to be calm, slow, and gentle. And on top of that, avoid bright colors and strong perfumes. The pamphlet then goes on to state that bees typically are non-aggressive to people unless they feel threatened or are stepped on or the privacy of their nest is being encroached on. And while you are now armed with this information, you look up at your friend and are shocked. Your friend, in the bright blue jacket, wearing Axe body spray, is not only actively swatting at bees that are getting too close to him, but he is also trying to get a close look at the beehive. And it's this combination of moves that end up with him being attacked. And almost cartoonishly, you watch him run back and forth with his arms flailing until he runs so far ahead of you that you can't see him anymore. You wait for his screams to stop, you maneuver slowly around the bees, you respect their space, and seemingly magically, you're able to make it to the next area completely unscathed. However, as you meet up with your friend, you can't say the same for him, and his face looks like mine did in high school. Although fortunately, your friend is not allergic to bees. And while he's in pain, you and your friend are able to safely remove the stingers with a credit card, and you continue on your way, satisfied that you had just survived your first animal attack. One that may seem tame, although when you realize that the attacks are only going to get more dangerous from here on out, and the fact that if you did have a bee allergy, that encounter would be deadly, you realize that maybe this isn't so much of a walk in the park. As you and your bro exit the forest and enter a clearing, you notice something peculiar. It's a glass of water on a wooden stool in front of a small pond. At this point, your bro is already over the entire ordeal and just wants to get out and get his prize. And for that reason, he picks up the glass of water, pours it on his head to cool himself off, and begins to trek his way through that pond. But almost instantly, you realize that that wasn't a normal glass of water, and this wasn't a normal pond. Because sitting on top of your bro's head was a small and nearly transparent creature known as the box jellyfish. And it was actually a warning of what existed in the pond. Generally, most jellyfish are completely harmless. However, there are a few species that are very harmful, one of those specific species being the box jellyfish. Now, while you could argue that box jellyfish don't necessarily attack you, I would argue that they don't need to, because even just passively brushing against their tentacles could leave you in excruciating pain and potentially in the grave. Box jellyfish are particularly dangerous because they are so hard to see. As you and your bro did, or I guess didn't see in the glass of water, box jellyfish are almost transparent. And typically, you feel their tentacles burning your skin before you actually see the jellyfish itself, making encounters with them not uncommon and not pleasant whatsoever. Now, similar to bees, the best way to avoid a jellyfish attack would be avoidance. But since that's literally the case for any animal, I'm gonna stop saying that, although it is true. As you open up the pamphlet to learn about the box jellyfish, you read that the symptoms of coming in contact with a box jellyfish range from either mild skin irritation to severe pain, nausea, and cardiac complications, and the complexity and severity of your symptoms really depend on the amount of venom you become exposed to. Now, armed with this information, you look up from the pamphlet and see that your bro is already halfway through the pond, neck deep in this water. And because of this, you ask him, "Hey, do you feel like you're touching anything in the water?" And he replies, "Yeah, I do actually. It feels like there's invisible marshmallows, but I can't feel anything." That is, until moments later when you hear your friend begin to scream in agonizing pain. You watch him run out of the pond, and standing on the other side, you see him covered from the neck down with long stripes of inflamed skin, areas that got in contact with these jellyfish. And there's still even remnants of jellyfish tentacles sitting on his skin. furthering the exposure and worsening the pain. Knowing that you too have to walk through this pond, you desperately look around for anything that could potentially help you. And it's at that point when you once again consult the pamphlet and read that one of the best ways to avoid stings is to wear a sting suit, or even a traditional wetsuit. And while you don't have access to a wetsuit, you do your very best to insulate the clothes you're wearing. You tuck your pants into your socks, your shirt into your pants, and you put your hands deeply in your pocket. And once you've become as insulated as possible, you try to quickly make your way around the edge of the pond, only going about waist deep in the water and thankfully avoiding a jellyfish attack. Although now that your friend is really looking worse for wear, you once again consult the book about potential remedies for jellyfish attacks. And while your friend is already mentally preparing for a golden shower, you inform him that the book says that fresh water and urine are actually not helpful for jellyfish stings, and they in most cases make it worse. And what you really want to use to neutralize the venom and end the pain is vinegar. Unfortunately, sitting right beside your friend was a large jug of white vinegar. And as you begin to pour it all over your bro, he instantly begins to feel better. And after the vinegar has been used up, you take your handkerchief out of your pocket, you begin to wipe off the tentacles that are still on his body. In this case, your friend was lucky enough to not require medical attention. However, in severe cases of box jellyfish stings, or where a large group of stings happen, it is advised you seek medical attention immediately, as in those cases you may require antivenom to survive. Okay, this is off topic, but do you smell that? It smells like you didn't shower. And if that's the case, I feel bad for your anime body pillow. But in case you did, you're obviously not using the right stuff, which is why this video is sponsored by Cheeky Soap. Cheeky Soap is my favorite soap company by far, and it was actually founded by this guy.
Hey, Brody.
Over the last year, I got absolutely obsessed with bar soap, but I quickly ran into one major problem. Almost every bar soap that I tried left my sensitive skin feeling dry. It was for this reason that when I first tried Cheeky, I was so impressed that it didn't only smell good, but it literally left my skin feeling moisturized after just one shower, which is why I was so eager to partner with them when they asked me. Not only do they have an amazing handful of core scents in their collection, but on top of that, Cheeky even told me that if we're able to get enough support, they are willing to make a custom Trust Me Bro soap bar. So if you've never tried bar soap before, or you use bar soap and are looking for something new, I would definitely recommend giving Cheeky a try using my link in the description to not only get a discount, but to help support the channel. Click the link in the description, use my code, and get the starter bundle today to upgrade your showers. I guarantee you will not be looking back. Now, let's get back to the video. Leaving the pond and heading back to the woods, you and your friend understand that perhaps we should be a bit more careful when approaching these animals, because this obviously is not their first rodeo. And if bees and jellyfish are giving us this much of a hard time, we might not stand a chance against the real predators. Heading back into the woods, you notice once again a small clearing. Although there's no pond, there is simply a stick in the grass. And while at this point you both know better than to grab it, you do slowly approach it to see what it could be. And as you approach it, the stick turns out to be not a stick at all. And it's actually a king cobra, the longest venomous snake in the entire world. It's also a snake that carries a powerful neurotoxin that can seriously mess you up. Instinctually, you and your bro take a few steps back and you instantly consult the pamphlet. And it begins by telling you exactly how deadly and dangerous a king cobra is, and then it tells you what you should do if you encounter it. The first step it recommends is remaining absolutely dead calm. Sudden movements are the perfect way to make the cobra feel threatened and provoke an attack, something you don't want to happen. That means you cannot just run away, and you cannot try to strike it yourself. Since you are already in close proximity to the king cobra and have pissed it off by encroaching on its personal space, it may seem helpful to try to kick it, to just, get it out of your way and to scare it off. But realistically, a king cobra can bite much faster than you can kick, and extending your leg towards it is only going to result in a bite that could take your life. And what the pamphlet actually recommends is to do nothing of the sort. Now that you and your bro have already separated yourselves from the snake, it's important to analyze how the snake is feeling. And with the king cobra specifically, if their hood is spread out and their body is off the ground and they are hissing loudly, that means they are peak mad. And your best bet is to create as much space as possible. If this situation was to happen in a real-world scenario, your best bet would be to retrace your steps and leave. But in this case, with you and your bro having to move forward, you have to get creative. And what you and your bro decide to do is to quickly separate and begin moving in opposite directions, almost moving in a circle around the snake. That way, you and your bro could each keep an optimal distance from the king cobra and also mitigate your chances of being bit. because realistically the cobra can only go after one of you if it decides to strike. And fortunately, even though you and your bro accidentally made this king cobra extremely upset, you were able to pass by it successfully by remaining calm, moving slowly, and keeping your distance. And for that reason, preventing a true attack. Now, if you and your bro weren't so lucky and happened to be bit by the cobra, as the pamphlet states, the best course of action is to still remain calm, but begin taking immediate measures. And what it recommends is immobilizing the limb that was bit and keeping it at or below your heart level. Beyond just that, the pamphlet also recommends removing any tight clothing or jewelry, as your body will begin to swell, and it also recommends against cutting the wound or sucking out venom, as that has not been shown to be an effective preventative measure. Once you've immobilized your limb and removed tight clothing and are trying your best to remain calm, the final thing you must do is seek medical attention, because the neurotoxin in king cobra venom causes paralysis, and if left untreated, can paralyze your lungs, causing you to die. However, fortunately, in this case, your friend did not have a near-death experience, although you're far from out of the woods. As you and your bro stumble into the next clearing, you notice that there's no bees, no jellyfish, no venomous sticks in the grass, but you do see a small, gray, fuzzy thing. It's just sitting there in the grass, and you and your bro can't make out what it is. And at this point, knowing better than just to run up to it, you and your bro decide to yell at it to try to get its attention, because it's obviously something. And after a few shouts, you notice that this ball is moving, and it turns its head to look at you, and what you see is the most adorable puppy you've ever seen. This puppy is all sad and alone and is shaking and crying. Only moments after seeing the innocent face of this puppy, you couldn't help yourself but to go and comfort it. And as you approach this puppy and pick it up, it begins to lick you and love you, and it honestly looks like it's much happier. And for the first time so far in the zoo, you guys are actually enjoying yourselves and feel like you're catching a break. Although your precious puppy time is quickly cut short when you hear a familiar noise in the distance. It's not the bark of a dog, but the howl of a wolf. And you quickly realize that this is a wolf pup, and the pack was about to return sooner rather than later. But before you can even put the puppy down and head on your way, you notice the pack arriving. And judging by the visible ribs on their sides, they had just come back from an unsuccessful hunt. Now, in most cases, wolf attacks are extremely rare, for humans that is. Although, because you are in the wolf's territory, currently engaging with a wolf pup, the pack has no choice but to challenge you and protect their young. As you put the pup down and begin to retrace your steps, the wolves begin to close in on you, and you quickly refer to the pamphlet. And the first thing the pamphlet says is do not run if you encounter wild wolves. Running will only trigger their chase instinct, and will trigger a single wolf or an entire wolf pack to chase you down until the end. Instead, what you should do if you are in a situation where there's a wolf angry at you is to stand tall and make yourself appear as large as possible. And you do exactly that. You take off your backpacks, put them above your head, and begin shouting the most aggressive nonsense you can conjure. And quickly, with your arms in the air and your dominance being asserted, the wolves don't back off, but they do pause in their approach towards you. Consulting the book once again as you are making progress, you read that the next step is to slowly back away while keeping your eyes on the animal and maintaining your confident posture. If you turn your back to the animal or begin to crouch or slouch, this may signal weakness, once again triggering an attack. As you and your bro are standing confidently, you notice the wolf pack begin to no longer circle you and congregate around the pup in front of you, meaning that you're no longer surrounded, but you still have a pack to go through if you want to complete the challenge. And it's because of this that you continue to read the pamphlet, and it informs you that if you are not able to safely back away from wolves, your next best bet is to throw things at it. Sticks, rocks, or even your backpacks are great ways to deter escalation. And in this case, your bro throws his backpack directly at the pack, missing the wolves but startling them enough to begin backing away themselves. As you've learned from the pamphlet, wolves tend to avoid people and do not see humans as prey, and these wolves do not want to attack you. And now that they've been able to gather their pup and congregate, they are much more likely to leave than attack. And that is exactly what's happening after your bro threw his backpack. And as the wolves begin to head on their way, you throw your backpack as well, and you and your bro continue to stand strong until they are completely out of sight. And it's at that point when you collect your bags and continue walking, heading back into the woods and making your way to the next clearing, you and your bro are beginning to feel confident because you're consistently learning and successfully avoiding, or at least surviving, animal attacks. Although little did you and your bro know that the attacks to come would be far beyond just humbling. As you make your way into the next clearing, you notice that this clearing's for once empty. There's no sticks, there's no fuzzball, there's no bees, there's literally nothing. But upon a closer inspection, there is a pile of dirt basically right in front of you. This pile of dirt is covered in flies and honestly smells pretty gross. And while your bro thinks this might be an anthill and that the next animal attack is fire ants, you realize that what you're looking at is not an anthill. It's a pile of animal feces. And you notice beside it are prints that are large and look like paws. And putting two and two together, you realize that these feces came from a predator, and the predator is not far at all. As you crouch down to get a better look at the paw prints in the soil, your bro is quickly attacked by a mountain lion. And now the clock is ticking before your friend becomes dinner for this animal. As your friend is face down in the dirt and the mountain lion is biting into its backpack, you quickly consult the pamphlet. And the pamphlet informs you that mountain lions are stealth hunters, which is why it jumped out of the bushes to attack your friend, although they typically don't attack humans. However, in this case, the mountain lion must have thought your friend was a deer. And mountain lions are rather unique in their attack style, because not many predators try to ambush their prey like mountain lions, making them extra dangerous if you happen to get mistaken for something they're actually looking for. Regardless, time is of the essence, and right now, preventative measures or looking big is simply not an option. It is life or death for your bro, and you quickly begin shouting life-saving advice at him from the pamphlet. The first recommendation is to fight back aggressively and immediately. And instantly, your bro flips over and begins trying to drive a wedge between himself and the mountain lion via his legs. And the next thing you shout now that he is more vulnerable is to protect your head and neck and chest. These are some of the most vulnerable areas on your body that one slash from a mountain lion could easily kill you with. And for that reason, you try to keep your legs near your chest and you cover your face and neck with your forearm and elbows. And now you inform him that when the opportunity arises, strike the sensitive areas of the mountain lion, specifically the eyes and nose. And he begins to bash the nose of the mountain lion with his elbow, and as the mountain lion becomes stunned by its prey fighting back, he quickly mashes his fist on the eye of the mountain lion. As you continue to read, you see that it's crucial to fight back as aggressively as possible and to not play dead, because similar to running, playing dead will only trigger an attack response from these animals. And your best chance of surviving an attack is to resist as much as possible to prove to the animal that you are simply not worth fighting. And in the case of your bro, that is exactly what happens. The mountain lion begins to quickly back away. He gets on his knees and then on his feet, and once again, you two both assume a confident, tall stance, causing the predator to back away into the bushes that it only recently jumped out of. Recouping with your bro, you guys are both, at this point, questioning your decision, but also understanding that there is truly no heading back at this point. You quickly check your friend to make sure he's not bleeding from anywhere vital, and you continue back into the woods. You notice the ground getting marshier and the trees getting more droopy, and you realize you're heading out of the woods and into the swamp. And while you didn't expect Shrek to be one of the predators on this list, at this point, anything is possible. Although this time, it's different than before. The water is murky. There's vegetation both on the shoreline and in the water. And while you know you need to cross this body of water, you still don't know what lies within it. That is, until two eyes pop out of the water. And while your friend still isn't convinced it's not Shrek, you know exactly what you're looking at. It's an alligator. Alligators are no doubt terrifying, but they're also so interesting because they are literally like living dinosaurs. But on this particular day, you don't feel like getting up close and personal with a relic from the dinosaur era. As you consult the pamphlet, the first thing you see is that it's recommended that if you encounter an alligator to maintain a safe distance. And it's recommended to have at least a 20 or 30 foot gap between yourself and the alligator. And while you know you're already much closer than that and have to get closer in order to pass it, you continue reading to see if there's any additional information to survive the unlikely but possible attack. One thing you know in the pamphlet is that alligator attacks on humans are rare, although in your case, you're getting attacked by every animal, so that doesn't mean much to you. And in the cases of alligator versus human brawls, alligators typically attack because they either felt threatened or had their nest encroached upon, or they even potentially mistook a person for prey. And while you understand that you could basically fall into any of those categories, you don't feel super confident about crossing this body of water. Your bro, with the worst luck in the world and apparently a death wish, interrupts your reading and tells you an alligator can't bite what it can't catch. And he sprints into the body of water, hoping to get through as quickly as possible. Although, unfortunately for him, he literally ran directly into the jaws of the alligator. And now you're once again yelling life-saving advice to him. One of the first things you read, once again, is that if you get into a situation with an alligator, it's best to fight back immediately. Not by trying to pry its jaws open, because you have no chance at doing that, but by, once again, targeting sensitive areas. Alligator's primary method of attack is using a powerful bite to subdue prey. So if you can strike its eyes or nose to try to have it loosen its grip, you can ideally get out of its jaws and run fast away. And that's exactly what your bro does. He begins plunging his thumbs into the eyes of the alligator, causing the alligator to open its mouth only slightly, allowing your bro to roll out of the mouth of the alligator, swim across the body of water, and run like hell away from it. And as you read the pamphlet, you see that running away from alligators is highly recommended. And it's even stated that while alligators are fast in short bursts on land, they cannot outrun humans over longer distances. Meaning that there's no need to run in a zigzag pattern, and you can run as fast as you can, as far as you can, away in a straight line. Now, as you continue to read, you see that even if you survive an alligator attack, you're not in the clear just yet. Because if one of the teeth penetrates your skin, the bacteria in the alligator's mouth could cause a nasty infection. Although fortunately for your bro, the bites didn't penetrate through the backpack or the jacket he was wearing, meaning that he was bruised up, but alive. And after your bro's scuffle with the alligator, the scaly guy decided to kick rocks and swim down the stream, leaving the body of water safe for you to cross, allowing you to once again reunite with your unlucky buddy. As you both begin to catch your breath before you head into the next section of the arena, you hear a buzzing over the PA, and then you hear the voice of the coordinator. And the coordinator says that you and your bro are doing well, and that there are only 2 challenges left before you get the large prize. That is, if you survive. But that isn't the only thing the coordinator says. The coordinator also says to you directly watching at home, if you are enjoying this video about how to survive different animal attacks and want to see a part 2, leave a like or leave a comment on the video saying part 2. And if you want to see Trust Me Bro hit 2 million subscribers, make sure to subscribe if you're not already. And with that amazing message from the coordinator out of the way, let's get to the final challenges in this rather experimental house of horrors that is this zoo. As you make your way into one of the final clearings, you see the unmistakable sight of a tiger right in front of you. Although this tiger doesn't look quite right. This tiger looks skinny, frail, and gray in the face. You can tell this tiger is elderly, and you're almost curious if the zoo ran out of budget for its predators. But as you consult the pamphlet, before you even get anywhere near the tiger, you understand why there is an old tiger specifically in this zoo. As you read, you are informed that tigers typically hunt alone and usually target medium to large sized prey, such as wild boar, deer, and other animals. And human attacks for tigers aren't as uncommon as other animals we've discussed. And the most common instances where tigers attack humans are when a tiger is old, injured, or feels threatened. And these sorts of attacks are even more common in areas where both humans and tigers live in close proximity, such as rural villages and areas like that. Now knowing why there is an elderly tiger in front of you, you take pity on your bro, hand him the pamphlet, and tell him that you're gonna take one for the team, and all you ask him to do is read you the survival tactics. Fortunately, you remember exactly how to survive a mountain lion attack. And assuming a tiger is similar, you plan on using the same moves. And to save time, you don't only approach the tiger, you also begin to just lay on the ground in a defensive position, almost to call it on to you. And as the tiger begins to approach you and then poke you with its nose, you begin waiting for your friend to give you the next steps. But as you glance over at your friend as you are covering your head, you see that he is standing there cluelessly, picking his nose, and you realize you're left to your own devices. Without having any professional advice, you decide to go with Old Reliable. And as this tiger begins to mount you and open up its mouth to show off its massive teeth, you kick Terry the tiger right in the tiger testicles, and make this elderly tiger scream in pain and run away crying like a little kitten. Obviously, that's no real survival strategy, but in a pinch, it just happened to work. And as you backtrack to your friend, you rip the pamphlet out of his hand, smack him over the head with it, and continue on to the final portion of this crazy zoo's survival challenge. Heading out of the woods, once and for all, you're met with the beach, and the biggest body of water you've encountered so far. At this point, you're curious how all of this has even fit in this zoo, but you're honestly too over it to even ask. Luckily, this body of water is not something you have to swim through, because there is an albeit rickety bridge going directly across it. And while it's so long you can't see the other end of it, due to the fog that is over the water, you and your bro assume that this bridge is actually what's going to take you out, because there's no animals that live on bridges. And it's for this reason that you and your bro are sprinting down this bridge to just be done with the zoo, grateful that you're actually alive. However, as you're sprinting on this bridge through the fog clears and you notice a massive gap in the bridge directly in front of you. But unfortunately, it's too late to stop and you and your bro are both dropped into the water. Luckily, it's only a short gap between the end of the bridge and the beginning of the second part of it. But during your time in this water, you understand why this bridge is here, and you have just met the final predator in this video. Because your friend is so bruised and banged up, you quickly notice that the blood from his clothes are seeping into the water. And this blood in the water is attracting nearby sharks. And before you know it, you have 2 great white sharks circling you and your bro. Now, like most people know at this point, great white sharks are not trying to hunt humans particularly, although they are curious and will give a test bite to unfamiliar things, and will give more than a test bite to things they deem to be prey. And while these sharks don't see you and your bro as food, they don't know what to make of you and decide to learn a bit more. And as one of the sharks begins to approach your bro, you quickly begin reading on what he should do. As the shark approaches your friend and he gets more and more terrified, you tell him, hey, the pamphlet says to stay calm, maintain eye contact, and avoid splashing. You cannot outswim a great white shark, and it's not even worth trying. What you should do instead is keep yourself vertical and slowly back away. And while your friend seems receptive to this information, panic got the best of him. And as the shark swam by his leg, he kicked the shark in the nose, instantly angering it, causing the great white to circle back around in preparation for a bite. Seeing what's inevitably going to happen, you continue to read and see that the book states that if you are bitten, you need to defend yourself immediately, aiming specifically for the eyes, gills, or snout. Ideally with any object you have, or in the worst case, your fists. Even a small bite from a great white shark can be deadly, meaning that you have absolutely no margin for error. Feeling unconfident that your friend's going to be able to protect himself in this situation, you decide to do something rash. As the shark swim past you, while being focused on your friend, you decide to throw your backpack at the shark, giving it something to focus on. And as the shark bites on your backpack, you dive your fist deep into its gills, hoping to prove that you and your friend are not worth messing with. And fortunately, it works, and the 2 sharks swim away. But now you have no backpack. But a backpack is a small price to pay for your life. You and your bro quickly swim to the other side of the bridge and continue to walk until the bridge leads to the shore, and on the shore you see a building and a wall, similar to the wall that you approached on your way in, and 2 metal doors once again. You approach these doors and they instantly open for you, and you are met with a bright, shining light. This is what you've been waiting for. This is the room with the prize. This is everything you've wanted. And as you walk through the metal doors and walk into this very, very overwhelmingly bright room, you are met with the zoo's gift shop. And the coordinator you met previously hands both you and your bro 2 t-shirt vouchers to get a free t-shirt that says, I went to the worst zoo ever and all I got was this t-shirt. Not wanting to go home empty-handed, you and your bro collect your shirts and head home, vowing to never visit sketchy zoos ever again. How would you describe a ninja? I don't know, probably black hood, black robes, samurai sword, something like that. Oh yeah, cool. What if I told you were completely wrong and that was completely stupid? Well, I'd feel like a dumbass. Well, you sure look like one, but don't worry. In this video, I'm going to explain and debunk some very common historical misconceptions. So like I was just explaining to my friend, the way that we commonly imagine ninjas is almost completely inaccurate to the way that they actually looked. Ninjas looked nothing like that, and there was no such thing as a ninja uniform at all. Ninjas typically wore civilian clothing to blend in with everyone else. If you think about it, it makes sense to look like everyone else so they wouldn't draw attention to themselves. Walking around in an all-black hooded outfit with a sword on your back would probably cause some suspicion. Even during nighttime operations, ninjas would wear navy blue, not black. 1, to hide the stains of blood better. 2, because the navy blue would actually blend into the night sky better than black would. Ninjas were spies, assassins, covert agents, and their ultimate goal and specialty was to hide in plain sight. So the next time a kid comes to your door on Halloween dressed up as a historically inaccurate ninja, make sure you let him know that, hey, you don't look like a ninja, you look like a dummy, and you're not getting any candy, pajama kid. The next misconception is that people only live to be like 30 in the Middle Ages. That's not true at all. It is an accurate statement to say the life expectancy was shorter in the Middle Ages, however, not nearly as much shorter as you may think. For example, a fully grown, healthy 21-year-old man in medieval times could be expected to live all the way to the age of 64, which isn't necessarily super old, but definitely not, dying in your 30s or 40s. The largest reason for this misconception and common discrepancy is the fact that infant mortality in the Middle Ages was just so high, which is a problem we almost don't have anymore. With modern medicine and technological advances, the infant mortality rate, fortunately, is extremely low nowadays. But in the medieval times, if 50% of people are dying before they hit 1 year old, obviously the average life expectancy is going to be lower overall. Our third misconception that I personally remember hearing vividly as a child was that if you drop a penny off the Empire State Building and it lands on someone, it will kill them. This is completely false. Without getting too much into detail, let's just go over some simple numbers. For starters, a penny itself only weighs 2.5 grams. With the height that the penny would fall from the Empire State Building, it would have the opportunity to achieve terminal velocity. However, adjusting for wind resistance and air friction would only allow this to really reach anywhere from 30 to 100 miles per hour, which you might be thinking, 100 miles per hour? Damn, that's going to kill me. Well, no, because you have to think about the energy expenditure once it impacts. It takes roughly 68 joules of power to be able to fracture a human skull. That means anything with the force higher than 68 joules has a high probability of killing you if it impacts with your skull. Now, for context, a raindrop with its tiny mass at terminal velocity will only have 0.002 joules of kinetic energy, and a penny at terminal velocity will only have about 0.2 joules. So, although you may have heard, and it may seem that a metal object at terminal velocity could easily kill you, that's simply not the case, at least with a penny. So the next time you're up in a high building, throw all the change you can over the edge. It's completely safe, it's fun, and nobody will get mad at you. And if someone does get mad, just do what that really annoying kid in school would do. Just say, "It's a free country. It's a free country. I can do what I want. It's a free country." Nobody thinks that's annoying. It's honestly great. Number 4. Benjamin Franklin did not invent or discover electricity. At some point, you probably heard the story of Benjamin Franklin tying a key to a kite and going out in a thunderstorm. Now, this story alone is already debated on when or if it ever even happened, but that's not what I'm focusing on. My focus is on the claim that Benjamin Franklin discovered electricity. Right off the bat, one thing to make very clear is that nobody invented electricity. It seems pretty obvious, but just to clear the air, electricity is a natural force that exists in this world. Therefore, it is not invented, it is simply discovered. A bit of a nitpick, but worth mentioning. Now, to give credit where credit is due, Benjamin Franklin had one of the greatest scientific minds of his time. He was interested in many areas of science, made many discoveries, and even invented many things, including bifocal glasses. But he was not the first to discover electricity. Egyptian scholars wrote in text in 2750 BC referring to electric fish, known as the thunders of the Nile, and several Mediterranean cultures were aware of static electricity. The first proper electric study was conducted in the 1600s by English scientist William Gilbert, who actually coined the term electricity. Benjamin Franklin had numerous contributions in the field of electricity, notably demonstrating the electric nature of lightning with his key experiment, but he was not the first to discover it. This next one honestly blows my mind. People still believe that WWE is fake when it's obviously real. Like, just look at John Cena. He's real. He's as real as it gets. What do you think he's been doing for the last 20 years? Just faking it? Just doing nothing? Why do you think Fred would have John Cena in his movie if he was just a big phony? This is just complete lunacy. And even though it's modern history, it's still history and it's still real. Okay. Have you seen this painting? This is American Gothic by Grant Wood. And if you look at it, what do you see? A man, a woman, a pitchfork, a house, a barn. Now, if you're like most people, you probably assumed, oh, this is a husband and wife. Well, actually, no. This is a daughter and father. So now you just look creepy. Completely off topic, but just kind of interesting was how this painting even came to be in the first place. The only reason this painting exists is because Grant Wood, the original painter of the painting, saw this house that he was so inspired by that he said, I want to paint the people that probably would have lived here. And the people that modeled for the painting aren't even related. The woman in the painting is Grant's sister, and the man is their family dentist, which is so funny, but kind of interesting. Okay, so this next one makes a lot of sense, but I've just never thought about it. Ancient Greek and Roman sculptures were actually originally painted with color. They only appear white today because the original pigments have just deteriorated. There are some well-preserved statues that still have traces of their original color, but it is extremely rare. Think about it. Your 2006 Honda Civic has paint falling off. You think the pigments of 2,000 years ago are going to last forever? No. Speaking of things you can't see anymore, Helen Keller was famous for being a great speaker because of her limitations, right? If you do some research on her, or maybe if you just have some peripheral knowledge, that's probably what you understand. But actually, Helen was a great proponent of socialism and communism. She spoke mostly on workers and women's rights, and she advocated for an American communist government. I just find this misconception quite interesting because a lot of information about Helen Keller has nothing to do with this, but this is the primary reason why she gained public popularity. Obviously, her story is motivational, and she was very well spoken for someone in her situation, but the majority of her initial content was all about communism, which is just so interesting that that's not talked about. Whether you support or don't support communism, I feel like this is just interesting that this fact is just left out, and she's just seen as, oh yeah, she was a great motivational speaker. Well, what did you talk about? And ladies and gentlemen, the last thing that I want to talk about is not communism. It is our last historical misconception. This misconception is that chastity belts were a medieval thing. Chastity belts were not a medieval thing at all. They didn't even exist back then. Also, a lot of medieval chastity belts that have been found are either complete fakes or anti-masturbation devices from the 19th to 20th century, when there was a widespread belief that masturbation could lead to insanity. In 1878, Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, yes, that Kellogg, the creator of cornflakes, he was an advocate for complete abstinence of all kinds. There is literally a quote from John Kellogg that goes as follows: "Neither the plague, nor war, nor smallpox, nor similar diseases have produced results so disastrous to humanity as the habit of masturbation." All I'm saying is I think Johnny Boy should stick to cereal. And with that being said, I would love to hear from you guys. How many of these misconceptions have you heard of? And how many of these did you actually believe before watching this video? Let me know in the comments. And also, if there's any misconceptions that you know the truth about, leave them in the comments below. And who knows, maybe I'll make a part 2.